Hi, Rodney. We're waiting on you.
Good morning. I ask unanimous consent that members not on the subcommittee be permitted to sit with the subcommittee at today's hearing and ask questions without objection. So ordered.
I regrettably cannot object because he's not here yet. But, I would like for the record that Garrett Grace did not say please to get put on this.
So noted. I will now make my own opening statement. I want to welcome you all to today's hearing. There's some surprising, at least to me, issues to be discussed and current challenges that this committee needs to take under advisement. As Congress looks to enact changes to trucking policy and the reauthorization upcoming, how to improve safety must be a guiding question. And I must say, new questions, new challenges, new statistics need to be explained. For example, truck crash fatalities jumped nearly 10% in 1 year between 2016 and 2017. I will have questions on that. I don't understand it. And these fatalities have increased 40% in the last 10 years since 2009. We clearly must do more to save lives. The federal government has no, and perhaps this has something to do with it, has no clear safety measurement system. The public does not have access to safety oversight data. The U.S. Department of Transportation has worked for over a decade to improve the system of safety oversight of trucking companies, but so far it has not translated the safety data it has collected into a way to measure, some meaningful measure that can help shippers and brokers and insurers and the traveling public understand which companies are safe and which companies are not. Currently, 86% of the industry, that's the overwhelming amount of the industry, has no safety rating. And many of the ratings in existence are so outdated that they are obsolete and no one should rely upon them. Congress needs to take action to get a handle on this problem and direct the U.S. Department of Transportation to finalize a safety fitness determination rule. We will also hear about an issue that I've tried to highlight for years: fixing the glaring omission in licensing rules that allows a new driver to obtain a commercial driver's license without a specific amount of behind-the-wheel training time required. DOT did issue a training rule in 2016, after 25 years, I should note, in which it had engaged in rulemaking, trying to get it right. And still, DOT failed to require a minimum number of hours behind the wheel. Why? What is the problem here? Providing robust training empowers drivers to be safe and confident on the road, and is an important way to attract quality drivers, and of course that is a major problem in the industry. We will also hear today that the trucking industry is increasingly losing drivers, and obviously for years now has had trouble attracting drivers. This is not an occupation in which people want to engage, especially young people today, and we need to understand why and what to do about it. While some in the industry call for lowering the interstate driving age from 21 to 28, nothing to solve, and this certainly doesn't solve, the underlying factors that thwart drivers, the industry from attracting drivers and keeping good drivers. That's probably wages and the really appalling working conditions that come with being a truck driver in our country today. There is a growing recognition that the way drivers are compensated by the load or the mile, not by the hour, is a problem. Drivers face increased pressure to deliver goods, although many factors on the routes are beyond their control. For example, congested roads and delays at shipper facilities. Segments of the industry are seeking exemption requests from Congress for additional on-duty time, but these requests focus on the ability for companies to squeeze more hours into the day. There is no mention that extra hours do not mean extra pay for millions of drivers in the industry. This, too, is something the subcommittee, which is responsible for oversight of hours of service regulation, needs to focus on for a solution, finally. I'm eager to hear about the future of the industry, and I particularly look forward to the strides that companies such as PepsiCo, which is testifying on the panel, have made to electrify and green their truck fleets. Technology and innovation continues to hold great potential to realize safety gains and to improve mobility in goods movement. But these gains can only be recognized if we find the right balance to protect consumers and drivers and workers in the industry while at the same time compensating innovation. The committee must play a strong role in striking indeed this balance. I also note that full automation is not right around the corner, exciting as this notion is. In the immediate term, technology is available to save lives, such as automatic emergency braking and collision warning systems, although these remain optional on trucks today. Finally, I would like to welcome Marianne Carth and Lois Durso, who have been dedicated safety advocates. In our audience today is Marianne Carth. I want to thank both of these women for their efforts to turn the tragic loss of their children in truck underride crashes, which we will also hear about today, into a force for good. I want to thank all of our witnesses. I will look forward to discussion about creative collaborative solutions that will elevate the state of the industry and improve the safety of trucks in the nation's in our nation today. I now call on the ranking member of the subcommittee, Mr. Davis, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to welcome everyone to today's hearing. The subcommittee is continuing to ramp up its efforts to reauthorize the federal surface transportation programs and policies. So far, we've held 2 hearings to gather stakeholder feedback on possible changes to those programs and those policies. Today, we're turning our attention to the policies and the programs that impact trucking. The trucking industry's contribution to the nation's economy is very significant. Trucks moved approximately 10.8 billion tons of freight in 2017, and the industry employs over 6 million drivers. The subcommittee has broad jurisdiction in this area. We are not only responsible for improving the surface transportation system that facilitates freight movement to domestic and to international markets, but we're also responsible for the safety of the users of that system and the regulatory environment that the trucking industry operates in. Each of these responsibilities must be considered in a comprehensive manner. As we proceed with our discussion today, there are a few thoughts that I think we should keep in mind. Safety has and must continue to be a focus of the Surface Transportation Reauthorization Bill. Congress, along with the Department of Transportation, our non-federal partners, and the private sector, has made strides to improve the safety of our surface transportation system. But there's always more that we can do together. We need to focus federal resources where they can make the most impact and continue to provide state law enforcement agencies with the tools and the resources they need to effectively enforce federal regulations. We must also be careful to not impose burdensome regulations that impede our ability to move goods or that do not help us achieve our safety objective. Finally, we must ensure that we make the necessary improvements to our surface transportation system to continue to facilitate the safe and efficient movement of freight. Our panel of witnesses represents a diverse set of perspectives on this topic and all of the topics mentioned before. With that, I want to thank our witnesses once again for being with us this morning. I look forward to hearing their testimony, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. I'd like to hear now from the chairman of the full committee, Mr. DeFazio.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks for calling this diverse group of witnesses. I expect we may have some lively interaction on the panel, which I always encourage. We're at a time where the trucking industry is, I think, reaching a tipping point. The pressures on carriers and drivers are extraordinary these days, and the policies that we enact here and in the next surface bill will have a major impact on public safety, carrier operations, truck driver wages, and working conditions. Carriers have set the expectation they can and will deliver more goods faster at lowest possible cost, but unfortunately, in many cases, drivers absorb the uncertainties of the goods movement and the pressures that are resulting, everything from congestion, wait time at ports, shipper facilities, fluctuating fuel prices. The drivers, and some are compensated only by the mile, not by the hour. They're often faced with the false choice of getting a day's wages or getting adequate rest and following hours of service rules. Even as their days get longer, many truck drivers haven't seen their wages increase. Sometimes when states move forward with progressive laws to provide truck drivers with paid sick leave or paid rest breaks, there's a tremendous attempt by the industry to preempt those rules, that rule of law. And given these pressures, there's no surprise that rigid, complex legislation such as hours of service feel unworkable. But we can't paper this over. We've got to write rules or mandate rules that make sense. We can't stretch drivers even thinner or force them to drive unreasonable hours and therefore tired and unsafely. We're going to debate about why there's a driver shortage. It's simple in my mind. If you want to attract and retain quality drivers, you need policies that ensure that trucking remains a good job with adequate compensation. It's also not surprising that safety indicators are moving the wrong direction, as mentioned by the chair. Large truck facilities have disturbingly climbed every year since 2009 in real terms, percentage of miles traveled. Saving lives is a very, very strong objective of this committee, and having better safety on the highways. More of the debates recently have all been about productivity, flexibility, and other disagreements, but we need to take positive steps and encourage DOT to take positive steps in this area. I think it's time for a new approach. I hear a lot from stakeholders, my colleagues, about the unintended consequences of federal rules. Rather than rendering existing rules worthless through exemptions, let's be intentional. Let's take a fresh look at a host of things that are not working in our system of goods movements and how they interact. Let's figure out how Congress and the administration can maintain the highest levels of safety with clear, enforceable regulations, but in a way that acknowledges the diversity of operations, rapidly changing nature of the industry. I also want to highlight cross-border trucking. I opposed NAFTA 25 years ago, in good part because it granted broad authority for Mexican carriers to drive on U.S. roads, despite the very significant discrepancies in safety standards between the two countries. And I am pleased that Ambassador Lighthizer and the administration have been listening, and the USMCA includes language that will reinforce the rights of the U.S. to limit grants of operating authority for Mexican carriers if it will harm U.S. companies or drivers. Now, Mr. Byrd, in your testimony, you lay out troubling ways in which U.S. companies undermine these efforts to protect the domestic labor market and U.S. truck drivers by employing drivers from Mexico through B-1, and I think Congress needs to take a hard look at that. And Mr. Speer, you talk about the industry's opposition to tolling, and I share many of your concerns there. Unfortunately, the only concrete proposal we've had out of this administration would be to shift all of the burden to the states to maintain the national system of infrastructure and goods movement, with a proliferation of tolling in the states. Now, the president himself has rejected that, but unfortunately, that is the only proposal we have seen. So I think, this committee is going to have to look very hard at tolling and congestion pricing, because states are moving ahead, and we need to look at what the implications are for the federal system and the future of the movement of goods and people in this country. Welcome the witnesses and look forward to your testimony. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. DeFazio, Chairman DeFazio. I would like to welcome our witnesses. I'm going to quickly go down their names. They are many, but that's because of the issues before us today. Kathy Chase, President, Advocates for Highway and Auto Safety. Chris Speer, President and CEO, American Trucking Associations. Todd Spencer, President, Owner-Operator, Independent Drivers Association. Lamont Byrd, Director, Health and Safety Department, International Brotherhood of Teamsters. Jason Craig, Director of Government Affairs, C.H. Robinson. Mr. Rodney Noble, Senior Director for Transportation, Global Procurement, PepsiCo. Deputy Chief Mark Savage, Colorado Highway Patrol, on behalf of the Commercial Vehicle Alliance, and Andy Young, Truck Safety Advocates. Thank you all for being here. We look forward to your testimony. Without objection, our witnesses' full statements will be included in the record. Since your written statement has been made a part of the record, the subcommittee requests that you limit your oral testimony to 5 minutes. Before we hear from our distinguished panel of witnesses, I recognize Representative Gibbs to introduce Mr. Young.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to welcome Mr. Andy Young. He's a constituent. It's not every day you get to welcome a constituent to the committee as a witness, and also welcome to Washington, D.C. And you also see in his testimony he's proud owner of an old classic Peterbilt 359. And anybody knows anything about trucks, that's the king of all trucks, right? So welcome, and glad you're here.
Thank you.
I yield back.
Thank you very much. We will now proceed with our witnesses. President Kathy Chase, Advocates for Highway and Auto Safety. You may begin.
Good morning, Chairwoman Norton, Ranking Member Davis, and Chairman DeFazio, and members of the subcommittee. I'm Kathy Chase, President of Advocates for Highway and Auto Safety. Founded in 1989, Advocates is a coalition comprised of public health, safety, and consumer organizations and property casualty insurance companies dedicated to reducing crashes, deaths, injuries, and costs on our nation's roads. Thank you for holding today's hearing, whose title aptly captures that the state of trucking in America has reached a pressure point. Before today is over, more than a dozen people will be killed, and more than 400 will suffer injuries in truck crashes based on averages. Unfortunately, these numbers are getting worse. Since 2009, when truck crash fatalities were at the most recent low point, Deaths have gone up more than 40%. While trucking is a vital, cherished, and necessary part of our country's commerce, we can and must do better. Last week, I had the opportunity to go on a ride-along in a truck on I-95. Spending the day in the cab not only gave me firsthand insight into the pressures faced by truck drivers, but also fortified our position that this subcommittee should advance legislation to improve conditions for truck drivers and, in turn, for all motorists. Seeing how seamlessly advanced technologies work and that they are available and in trucks was remarkable. The speed limiter, electronic logging device, lane departure warning, and automatic emergency braking, which thankfully did not have to engage during my trip, all provided added safety assurance. Additionally, these technologies imbued the driver with tremendous pride in his job. Legislation to require these technologies as standard equipment would help ensure all truck drivers have access to this life-saving systems. I also witnessed the importance of providing drivers with an opportunity for a break. When was the last time any of us worked 8 straight hours without one, let alone day after day? The ability to stand up, stretch your legs, grab something to eat, or other small tasks we all take for granted is severely limited when driving a truck. In addition to threats to needed breaks, there are 3 other proposals we urge you to reject. First, attempts to increase truck size and weights, including state and industry-specific exemptions, pilot programs, and a configuration known as double 33s, should be denied. Bigger and heavier trucks mean bigger problems for safety and infrastructure. Second, attempts to further chip away at rules in place to prevent tired truckers should be opposed. Fatigue is a major truck safety problem, as identified for many years by the National Transportation Safety Board. Since the ELD rule took effect, driver inspections with an hours of service violation have decreased substantially. And third, efforts to pull teens from carrying books in high school highways to getting behind the wheel on high-speed highways are unsafe and unwise. CMV drivers under age 21 are 4 to 6 times more likely to be involved in a fatal truck crash. During my ride-along, I was particularly struck by the massive amount of responsibility a driver has in addition to driving. Conversely, the good news is that common sense remedies are available and could be saving lives today. I will briefly discuss 5 innovative and proven solutions. First, speed limiters, which are currently being used in a majority of trucks, could help prevent and mitigate truck crashes. According to federal data, over 1,000 lives are lost annually on average to speeding CMVs. Second, automatic emergency braking, also known as AEB, systems alert the driver to an object in front of it, such as a vehicle, and can apply the brakes if the driver fails to respond. Third, underride guards. Standards could save lives in horrific and violent crashes that occur when cars travel under a truck or trailer. Fourth, entry-level driver training rules must be improved to include a minimum number of behind the wheels to obtain a CDL, as the chairwoman noted earlier. And fifth, the FMCSA must have the ability to better identify and intervene with high-risk carriers. The safety fitness determination rulemaking should be reinstated, and all safety data that is part of the Compliance Safety Accountability Program should be available to the public. Lastly, any conversation about autonomous trucks must recognize that at a minimum, a driver with a CDL must be in the cab for the foreseeable future. This technology is not yet ready for prime time. Just last week, an article revealed that the CEO of Honda was taking a ride in a GM autonomous prototype when the car's software suddenly turned itself off even as the car kept moving. A safety driver had to take control and bring the car to a halt. I shudder to think about if the vehicle had been an 18-wheeler. We must also make sure there are performance requirements for new technology and that automated systems are never used as a justification for getting rid of critical safety regulations. Thank you again for your leadership in holding this hearing and for the opportunity to testify. We look forward to working together with this subcommittee to reverse the upward trend of truck crash fatalities.
Thank you very much, Ms. Chase. Christopher Spear, President, CEO, American Trucking Associations.
Madam Chair, Ranking Member Davis, full committee chairman DeFazio, members of the subcommittee, let me extend my sincerest appreciation for the opportunity to testify today before the subcommittee on behalf of the American Trucking Associations. ATA is now in its 86th year as the largest voice of the trucking industry, serving 50 state associations and a vast array of members, including carriers and their several million drivers, technicians, and valued employees, truck and trailer manufacturers, shippers, suppliers, including technology innovators and software companies, public and private truck driving schools, employee health and wellness, law firms, as well as insurers, just to name a few. In short, ATA has presence in every state and congressional district in the country and is closely affiliated with national trucking associations throughout the world. Despite trucks being just 4% of the vehicles on our highways and 2/3 of the accidents involving trucks being caused by passenger vehicles, the trucking industry still spends $9.5 billion conservatively each year on safety, including technology, training, and compliance. Broadly, trucking employment now exceeds 7.7 million people. That's 1 in 18 jobs in the United States, where a truck driver is the top job in 29 states. Trucks move more than 71% of the domestic freight, and the people that drive, service, load, and unload them are to be commended. They are husbands and wives, moms and dads, Democrats and Republicans. They include veterans, the disabled, minorities. They are involved in your local communities, from coaching Little League to raising thousands of dollars for kids with cancer. And like our men and women in uniform, they are among the most patriotic and hardworking people in America. The first to help those impacted by floods, fires, tornadoes, hurricanes, by delivering food, water, medicine, and comfort. And they are committed to helping others, often the first to respond on the scene of an accident, stopping to help save people that they've never met. This is today's trucking industry. This is an American story. And these are the millions of people ATA proudly represents. The subcommittee is tasked with the reauthorization of the FAST Act, including a safety title. My members, staff, and I are prepared to help you write a bill that is grounded in data, not rhetoric, that's shaped by facts, not opinions, and relies on reality, not emotion. To that end, ATA has submitted written testimony for this hearing that provides countless citations, analysis of current issues, both in effect as well as proposed, as well as recommendations that address policy and programmatic shortfalls. ATA also believes it is important that you consider the future of the trucking industry, looking beyond the hood 5, 10, 15 years out, and how we can improve safety through innovation, such as connectivity. How we can grow a diverse, trained, and drug-free workforce that shores up the very real and very well-documented shortage of talent. How trucking can generate and invest real money, not fake funding, into our decaying infrastructure. And how trucking can help you shape free and fair trade agreements that make the United States the strongest economy in the world. In closing, I want to personally underscore ATA's commitment to helping this subcommittee shape this legislation. You deserve testimony and answers that are squarely backed by data, not baseless rhetoric. ATA also will educate your colleagues in the House, Senate, and the administration on why this bill matters. The political environment we all now find ourselves in raises the bar on getting anything passed, and this bill is no exception. This effort will require cooperation and compromise. Disagreements over policy are expected, yet ATA will work with you to resolve any differences, build consensus, and advocate passage of a reauthorization bill that improves safety, leverages innovation, and enables our industry to meet the surging demands of our nation's economy. Again, I appreciate the opportunity to represent ATA here today and look forward to your questions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, and thank you for staying within your time. Now we'd move on to Mr. Todd Spencer, President of OOIDA, Owner-Operator Independent Driver Association. Mr. Spencer.
Chairman DeFazio, Ranking Member Davis, and members of the subcommittee, Thank you for the opportunity to share the views of our nation's small business professional truckers here today. My name is Todd Spencer. I am President and CEO of the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association. OOIDA is a trade association founded in 1973 by real truckers as a result of significant disruptions that occurred in the industry. When I say real truckers, I mean the men and women that actually deliver our nation's goods. All OOIDA officers and directors must come from behind the wheel. My background is from behind the wheel, and I still hold a commercial driver license. Small trucking businesses like those we represent account for 96% of registered motor carriers in the U.S. They are the safest and most diverse operators on our nation's roads. Our activities impact all sectors of the American economy on a daily basis. We move everything and anything wherever it needs to go. I commend the subcommittee for exploring the state of the trucking in America today, but I regret to inform you the current condition can only be defined as broken. Unfortunately, trucking has been fundamentally broken for years, and conditions show little sign of improving. Making a living as an over-the-road driver has never been easy. Our typical member will spend 250 nights or more away from home and family, dealing with way too much traffic and congestion, bad and unpredictable weather every year, and working around the schedules of all others in the supply chain. I know all of you on this subcommittee have heard about the driver shortage. I have too, pretty much my entire career in trucking. Guess what? They ain't one. Simple math tells the story. When the number you hear is 50,000 or some other number for the shortage, states issue over 400,000 new CDLs every year. Every year. What is incorrectly labeled as shortage is actually turnover, attrition. People attracted to trucking with the hopes of doing better for themselves and their family are quickly met with unkept promises and say goodbye to trucking. Not all of trucking is like this. LTL carriers don't complain about driver shortage, nor do private carriers. The reason is pay, benefits, and working conditions. Much of the growth that occurred in trucking during the past 2 years has come from among small carriers. They treat their drivers better. I really can't think of a worse response to the myth of a driver shortage than to lower the driving age or reduce the already low standards to get a CDL. This really is a highway safety issue. What's not a myth is that new drivers crash more often and younger drivers crash more often. There is no substitute for experience when it comes to safety, and doing things that help perpetuate the churn or driver turnover is not only counterproductive to safety, but it undermines the economics for all drivers. The economic model for paying drivers has been broken for a long time, despite the rhetoric you might hear about boosting pay and bonuses. If driver pay had been pegged to the Consumer Price Index in 1980, most of today's drivers would be bringing home 6 figures in wages. They don't make that because their value is set by what they can be replaced for, no matter how good or safe they may be, or even how many millions of safe miles they have driven. Another contributing factor is how they are paid. Most over-the-road drivers are paid exclusively by the mile with nothing for their time. Time stuff in traffic is an issue, to be sure, but the bigger one by far is time donated at shippers and receivers when trying to get in and out to stay on schedule and to comply with hours of service regulations. For too many drivers, this time can amount to 10 to 40 hours per week. And to add insult to this injury of time lost, we even have receivers and sometimes shippers now charging drivers fees of hundreds of dollars for being as little as 15 minutes late. This has to change if trucking is to attract and retain the good drivers we need to move the goods in the future. But it won't change as long as drivers can be detained and not be paid for their time. Going in hand with this is the exemption from the overtime pay that exists in the Fair Labor Standards Act for drivers operating under DOT regulations. The idea way back in the 1930s, when drivers were paid mostly by the hour, was to discourage really long work weeks. Now, with mileage pay as a norm, it does just the opposite. Highway safety is a top priority for our members and this committee. Where we are today is that we've never had more regulations, we've never had greater compliance with those regulations, and we've never had more enforcement of those regulations, and the crash rates are going up. This is just a copy of the regulations that all drivers are required to comply with. They're trained on virtually none, but they're there because they can be held responsible even when they should have no responsibility. CSA is a mandate from Congress that at best is only a partial measure.
Mr. Spencer, you're over 5 minutes. Would you summarize your remarks?
CSA is a mandate for Congress that at best is only a partial measure of compliance. It's a very, very flawed system. And no matter how you may torture that data, that's not going to change. ELDs, a monstrous mandate on small business truckers in the billions of dollars, realized no safety benefit whatsoever from that. No safety benefit, and if it has a direct impact on safety, it's quite likely a negative one because of the pressures it puts on drivers.
Thank you very much, Mr. Spencer. Next, Lamont Bird, Director, Health and Safety Department of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters.
Chairwoman Norton, Chairman DeFazio, and Ranking Member Davis, members of the subcommittee. I'm Lamont Bird. I'm the Director of the Safety and Health Department at the International Brotherhood of Teamsters. Thank you for inviting me here today to testify about the state of the U.S. trucking industry. The Teamsters Union represents more than 600,000 members who drive commercial motor vehicles, and under pressure is an appropriate description of how they operate on a daily basis. These pressures come from many sources, and some are related to policies that either don't exist or haven't kept pace with the changing transportation system. Specific policy issues relating to infrastructure, driver compensation, hours of service, driver harassment, driver health, driver training and retention, automation, and globalization all contribute to these pressures. The failure to improve and maintain the nation's infrastructure adversely impacts the trucking industry and its drivers. Traffic congestion fueled by years of delayed highway construction and improvement projects, reroutings caused by reduced weight limits on deteriorating bridges, and the general condition of some highways that cause road and lane closures all place drivers in a pressure cooker environment of stop-and-go traffic. These pressures increase exponentially as companies demand drivers be more productive, even if it means violating safety regulations. For example, the union is involved in a case where a driver reported that his cargo shifted en route. Management instructed him to fix the problem and keep working. He advised management that it was unsafe for him to do so on the roadside and returned to the terminal to properly secure the load and resume making deliveries. Although this driver complied with the safety regulations and the collective bargaining agreement, he was terminated. We anticipate being able to get this driver reinstated, but the company's actions send a chilling message to his coworkers. These non-driving stressors also highlight another major concern: proposals to increase the workday for our members. Proposals to extend the hours of service short-haul provision for CDL-qualified drivers from a 12-hour workday to 14 hours will lead to more work-related injuries and fatigue-related crashes for drivers and increased worker comp costs for motor carriers. The trucking industry is one of the most hazardous industries in the U.S. Studies show a correlation between the misuse of opioids and workers employed in high-hazard industries. The last thing we need to do is add more injury-inducing work into a driver's day, especially when we consider motor carriers already face significant challenges recruiting and hiring qualified drivers. These recruiting and retention challenges do not occur in a vacuum. The pay and working conditions of drivers is directly tied to the quality of drivers' day-to-day lives as well. While motor carriers lament about the driver shortage, they work behind the scenes to rob drivers of rest and mealtime. The IBT has fought in Congress against the preemption of state meal and rest breaks for truck drivers. Basic protections like these make the job better and help keep drivers in the industry. Yet the California Trucking Association filed a petition with FMCSA to preempt meal and rest breaks in that state, which the agency erroneously granted. We expect other state trucking and trade associations will surely follow, and recruitment and retention issues to continue. Some view lowering the minimum driving age for interstate drivers to 18 as another solution to this recruitment problem, even though significant evidence shows young drivers are more likely to be involved in crashes. Any effort to lower the driving age before the completion of the congressionally mandated pilot program for the military would be premature. Truck drivers are also threatened by transnational corporations that circumvent current trade rules and regulations that restrict cross-border trucking. Both U.S. and Mexican carriers have taken advantage of loopholes, allowing them to operate using suspect authority, which can jeopardize safety and raise questions about who is financially responsible when accidents occur. I ask that an investigative report prepared by Empower, a Mexico City-based research firm, be entered into the hearing record, and this is a copy. It describes irregular cross-border employment practices, citing specific examples of how the B-1 visa program has been taken advantage of by companies seeking to accomplish these goals. Finally, autonomous vehicle technology holds the potential to improve truck safety and efficiency, but the potential for job degradation or replacement puts our members on edge. Drivers recount how even lower levels of automation, like automatic braking systems, can malfunction and activate with no warning. Congress should demand proof and accountability for any new autonomous systems that are introduced so that these systems don't add to the incredible pressure drivers are already experiencing. Thank you, and I'll welcome any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Byrd. Next will be Jason Craig, Director of Government Affairs, C.H. Robinson.
Thank you, Chair Norton and Ranking Member Davis. As one of the nation's largest freight brokers and the original third-party logistics provider, C.H. Robinson has a unique view of how goods flow through our nation. Our employees in Phoenix, Eden Prairie, Chicago, and more than 130 offices across 40 states send their warm greetings. Our role within freight transportation has been described as a travel agent for goods, although that is simplistic. Our industry is often referred to as the third-party logistics, or 3PL industry, and is represented by the Transportation Intermediaries Association. While my colleagues have expertise in the operations of the physical truck, I wish to focus on how motor carriers are selected. Congress has given FMCSA many tools to remove unsafe trucks from the roads. These include assigning carriers an unsatisfactory safety rating and declaring carriers an imminent hazard, among others. C.H. Robinson has a thorough and consistent qualification process that includes reinforcing all of these actions and denies freight to any carrier declared out of service. However, from time to time, mostly in tragic and severe accidents, our carrier qualification process is challenged in court. A common theme in negligent selection cases is that brokers and shippers should check more than the credentials that allow motor carriers to operate, but there has been no guidance as to what additional data should result in denial of business beyond the tools Congress has provided. I have been involved in and monitoring the Compliance, Safety, and Accountability Program since 2006. While the original goal of replacing an audit-based safety fitness determination with one that is data-based is laudable and necessary, in practice, it has become extremely difficult to complete. In 2012, C.H. Robinson testified before this committee regarding then publicly available basic data and the confusion it created. This data was intended to help prioritize enforcement actions and carried the following warning: readers should not draw conclusions about a carrier's overall safety condition simply based on the data in this system, unless the motor carrier has received an unsatisfactory safety rating or has otherwise been ordered to discontinue operations. It is authorized to operate on the nation's roadways. That warning is still in place, and the SFD linking the data with the safety rating is still not complete. In 2014, CVSA wrote Administrator Darling to express concern about the public display of data. They wrote, SMS scores are a poor indicator of an individual fleet's propensity to be involved in crash risk. Their utility in providing the public with information about fleet safety performance is limited. In 2016, FMCSA released a draft SFD rule that would have established a new safety rating process. However, that rule was withdrawn in 2017 for very legitimate reasons around data consistency and correlation to crash risk. Congress mandated a study of the correlation between data and crash risk as part of the FAST Act. Part of the study was specifically to look at, quote, how members of the public use the SMS information. In addition, parts of the basic data were removed from public view. When the National Academy of Science submitted its study in 2017, they recommended that FMCSA, quote, should undertake a study to better understand the percentile ranks to support decisions regarding the usability of public scores. We were tremendously disappointed that the NAS study recommended yet another study. The experts at the NAS, quote, were unable to recommend to FMCSA whether to make all percentile ranks public. While we agree that the use of data is an effective tool to identify groups of at-risk carriers, data without context has and is being used inappropriately. In some cases, brokers and shippers have been made to take legal responsibility for gauging the safety of carriers when there is no clear regulatory system in place for us to reliably check. This confusion is especially damaging to smaller carriers who may not have extensive data available in their profile. Currently, there is no requirement to check any safety status. A selection standard will improve truck safety by more quickly eliminating business to those who should not be operating. A recent story perfectly describes the situation. In 2017, CVSA added an inactive US DOT number to the out-of-service criteria. Our regulators did not announce this change broadly. Many in the industry remain unaware of this. We want to ensure the carriers we select are safe to operate. We look forward to amplifying FMCSA decisions regarding who should be authorized to operate on the nation's roadways when Congress clearly establishes a motor carrier selection standard we can rely on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Craig. Next, we'll hear from Rodney Noble, Senior Director for Transportation Global Procurement, PepsiCo.
Thank you. Good morning. Chairman Norton, Ranking Member Davis, and Chairman DeFazio, and members of the subcommittee. I'm Rodney Noble. I've been handling transportation for PepsiCo for over 3 decades. PepsiCo is pleased to be here today to discuss our efforts to improve truck safety and reduce emissions. We own the largest independently owned fleet of trucks in the U.S. We have over 70,000 assets, including 36,000 trucks, and we employ over 25,000 drivers. Needless to say, we are experienced in transportation. First, some background on PepsiCo. PepsiCo is our largest food and beverage company in the United States. Our portfolio includes Pepsi-Cola, Frito-Lay products, as well as Aquafina, Lipton, Tropicana, Gatorade, and Quaker Oats. These brands and others are enjoyed by our consumers over 1 billion times a day around the world. With our franchise bottlers, we employ and support the jobs of nearly 140,000 Americans in all 50 states, the Virgin Islands, as well as the District of Columbia. We have 94 U.S. manufacturing sites, many in your districts, like our Quaker plant in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, our Pepsi plant in Cheverly, Maryland, our Frito-Lay facilities in Canton, Ohio, Jonesboro, Arkansas, and Dallas, Texas. PepsiCo is committed to reducing our absolute greenhouse gas emissions by 20% by 2030. We've made significant improvements in our fleet efficiencies by broadening our fuel use. We currently operate 1,500 alternative fuel vehicles. More specifically, PepsiCo owns one of the largest commercial fleets of electric vehicles in the U.S. and are exploring more use of electric power across our fleets. Frito-Lay has increased the use of our renewable natural gas, allowing us to cut diesel fuel by 30%. We are on track to cut conventional fuel by 50% by 2020. We have improved our truck routings that has reduced the miles that we have traveled. This not only cuts emissions, but it enhances safety because reducing miles reduces the chance of accidents. Safety is paramount at PepsiCo, and we've created a culture around our driver training programs. We've also invested in technology beyond what is needed to meet the government requirements. Our written statement includes more on our safety investments as well as our training programs. While PepsiCo is proud of our ability to innovate, we believe more can be done. But we are constrained by the outdated federal laws like the current 80,000-pound gross vehicle weight limit that was set in 1983. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words, and I'd like to call your attention to the screen, if you would. If you look, you can see the standard 53-foot trailer that is generally limited to 80,000 pounds in the U.S. that operates on 5 axles. The other vehicle has 6 axles, not 5, and in Canada, where the industry operates these at 102,500 pounds, we analyzed 5 years of our operation in Canada. These vehicles collectively traveling roughly 13 million miles, and we've had 0 fatality accidents. PepsiCo is a member of the SHIP Coalition, which supports a pilot program to allow single trucks on the interstate at 91,000 pounds, with the requirement of the 6-axle. SHIP believes this modest increase, subject to important safety and infrastructure protection conditions, would reduce road wear, emissions, and increase safety. Under this proposal, our products can move with fewer trucks. This leads to fewer miles, reducing the chance of accidents. This pilot would help reduce emissions, address the nationwide commercial driver shortage. The federal government can also address this issue by passing the Drive Safe Act, which I detailed in my written statement. In conclusion, PepsiCo is committed to improving our transportation operations. I've been doing this job for 30 years, and what keeps me up at night is what a lot of the folks here has talked about, is the safety of our drivers, the operational efficiency, but also attracting the next generation of drivers to the business. This hearing could not be more timely, and we look forward to working with you to address these critical challenges. Thank you for the time to be here today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Noble. And next, Deputy Chief Mark Savage, Colorado Highway Patrol, on behalf of the Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance. And, yes, please proceed.
Good afternoon, Chairwoman Norton, Ranking Member Davis, Full Committee Chair DeFazio, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for inviting me to participate in today's important discussion on the state of the trucking industry. As Deputy Chief of the Colorado State Patrol, I oversee our state's CMV enforcement program under the Motor Carrier Safety Assistance Program. Today, I am here representing the Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance, where I serve as a past president. CVSA represents state agencies who enforce motor carrier safety regulations in the United States, Canada, and Mexico. CVSA has a number of recommendations aimed at improving CMV safety. I'm sure many of them will be included in the discussion today. However, from our perspective, it all boils down to one thing: providing the motor carrier industry and the enforcement community with a regulatory framework that is clear, safety-driven, and enforceable. Every day across the country, CVSA members work with industry and FMCSA to reduce crashes and save lives. At the same time, the trucking industry continues to grow and becomes more sophisticated every day. Finding solutions that ensure the safe transport of goods is, needless to say, complicated. We need a regulatory framework that can keep pace with the changing industry. Unfortunately, regulatory activity at the agency, one of FMCSA's basic responsibilities, has come to a near standstill, and the necessary work to maintain regulations is suffering. For example, in 2016, FMCSA sent a letter to a member of the broadband service industry indicating that wireless and broadband services qualify under the Public Utility Hours of Service exemption. CVSA petitioned the agency in May of 2017 to update those regulations to reflect this decision. Last March, the agency granted our petition, yet we are still waiting for this simple definition change to be completed. This may seem like a small thing, but it is just one example of a number of similar scenarios that build upon one another. In addition, high-profile initiatives like rolling out the ELD rule consume the agency's resources, especially when they are met with a high volume of exemption requests. As a result, and in place of actual regulatory action, the agency has come to rely heavily on interpretations, personalized letters, informal electronic communications, enforcement guidance, frequently asked questions, and other means to provide enforcement and industry with clarity on issues that arise, with the expectations that the regulations will be updated in the future. Unfortunately, that update often never takes place, resulting in an inconsistent understanding of the requirements. When the regulations lack clarity, they are ineffective, creating confusion and inconsistencies in enforcement, which in turn leads to unnecessary conflict between enforcement and industry and ultimately erodes the CMV community's trust in the regulatory process. This lack of clarity in the regulations is further complicated by the growing list of exemptions being issued by various segments of the industry. While we understand the motor carrier industry is diverse, the motor carrier safety regulations are just that, safety regulations. And any exemption granted should be based on a clear, critical need, not merely because it would be more convenient for the industry. This is not to say we oppose all exemptions. We recognize that there are times where granting an exemption is appropriate. In those instances, FMCSA has a process in place to allow for the review of exemption requests based on the applicant's ability to demonstrate need and the ability to maintain an equivalent level of safety. We encourage members to point their constituents to this established process rather than incorporating exemptions into legislation. Exemptions not only have the potential to undermine safety, but they complicate the enforcement process and confuse inspectors, drivers, and the industry alike. While one individual exemption may not seem like such a big deal, they add up and result in confusing, contradictory, and inconsistent enforcement of the regulations. To address these concerns, we encourage Congress to impress upon FMCSA the importance of the agency conducting its regulatory responsibilities in a timely manner and ensure the agency has the necessary resources, technical staff, authority, and time to do so. In addition, we encourage members to minimize the number of exemptions written in legislation and to consider the practical impacts of any new requirements or programs to the enforcement community's ability to conduct our critical life-saving activities. Those of us in the enforcement community, including FMCSA, as well as those in the regulated industry, cannot achieve our mutual goal of reducing crashes and saving lives without clearly written safety regulations that are based on unbiased data and designed with safety as the top priority. We look forward to working with all of you to address these challenges. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy Chief Savage. Finally, Andy Young, Truck Safety Advocate. Pleased to have you.
Good morning, Chair Norton, Ranking Member Davis, Chair DeFazio as well, and members of the subcommittee. And good morning to my own member, Representative Bob Gibbs. I appreciate the warm welcome. I also want to recognize all staffers that are in the back of the room and standing along the side of the room. Without your support, this country would have some difficulty. So I appreciate all of the effort that you put forth. My belief is that many of the initiatives that we discussed today will not only save lives, but also truck driver livelihoods. I'm here in the truck safety advocate capacity, and all in this room are here because of the jobs they chose or the choices they've made. Several people in this room are here not because of the jobs they chose, and they didn't choose to be here, and they are the victims and survivors of truck crashes. I'd like to recognize them. Krista Hammock lost her daughter, Erin Alexander. She's here with Abigail. Marianne Karth is here with Annalie and Mary. Jerry Karth couldn't be here, neither could Lois Durzo, but they're here in spirit. Marianne Karth is here with Rebecca Hoynotsky, one of Marianne Karth's daughters. I'd like to recognize survivor Morgan Lake, also Steve and Sue Owings, who lost their son Cullum. I'd also like to mention Lori and Randy Higginbotham, who lost their son, Representative Cohen's own constituent in an underride crash. I'm here because I belong to the truth on the issue of underride. No matter how safe the car may actually be, the safety features of a car are only effective if there is a good structural interaction, vehicle crash compatibility between collision partners. There must be a geometrical matchup of the crush structure of both the striking vehicle and the vehicle being struck. The bumpers must match up. Otherwise, the lower profile car physically goes underneath the higher profile commercial motor vehicle. This is known as a truck underride. The first point of impact is beyond the hood and into the glass windshield. The second point of impact literally becomes the heads, faces, neck, spine, and chest of the lower profile car's occupants. The same holds true when a truck rear ends a passenger car. Often the front bumper of the truck goes over the back bumper of the car. The truck then climbs on top of the car, crushing the back seat and the occupants. I'd like to show a video to show side underride. Pay attention to the airbags and the seatbelts on how they are ineffective in the side underride crash.
This is at 35 miles an hour. The bottom one's with the guard. Airbags, seatbelts work with the guard. Without a guard, they don't. I submit to you that if the car manufacturers came before you today and said, hey, we want a car without airbags or seatbelts, this body would say no way. And in the same vein, we have crashes in situations where airbags and seatbelts don't work. Energy-absorbing bumpers, crumple zones don't work. Next week, I'm scheduled to meet with a mother who lost her only child, a recent 18-year-old high school graduate. A week ago yesterday was her funeral. Her body, her head included, was covered at the funeral. These are the closed casket injuries. The only part of her exposed was her right hand for her mother to hold. Truck safety initiatives such as Stop Under Rides Act of 2019, speed limiters, and automatic emergency braking all serve to allow better interaction between cars and trucks. It's adding equipment to these trucks that actually protect the truck driver too. When the truck driver is at fault, he or she suffers with a career-ending criminal vehicular homicide charge, frequently resulting in jail time. The truck company then likely encounters a civil lawsuit. The fatalities and catastrophic injuries associated with underride crashes typically produce 7- to 8-figure verdicts, all exceeding minimum insurance coverage and requirements. The truck companies are thereafter saddled with paying judgments in excess of insurance coverage. Smaller truck companies must sell assets or file for bankruptcy. Everyone loses in an underride truck crash, the truck company and truck driver included. Just simply making the car bumpers match up with the truck's side, front, and rear is the only way for cars' safety features and all the data and science that goes into protecting the occupants. And the data and science exists, and I submit to you, if we look at it from the right perspective, that the underride guard is required. The costs also. We heard today as well about CSA and public scores. Chair Norton mentioned several groups of people who rely on those public scores. One group that wasn't mentioned was the truck driver. If the truck driver is applying for a job, they need to know that the company they're working for is safe. They need to have access to this data. We heard from C.H. Robinson talking about the data is confusing. The out-of-service percentage rates are not confusing. They're very clear. If the companies exceed the national averages in out-of-service percentages, then they should not be hired. The Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration has performed an analysis that 10% of the motor carriers represent nearly 50% of the crashes. And it's those 10% are the bad apples that spoil the bunch for us. I love trucks, I love the trucking industry, and I particularly love the truck driver. I represent many truck drivers who are harmed in these crashes. But we need to make sure that these truck drivers are protected and have a job that is worth going to and also has a job that can pay the rent and pay the mortgage. Both speed limiters and AABs and underride guards will protect that truck driver. I've driven a truck with an underride guard, never felt more comfortable knowing that that guard was there. I want to look at how all these issues not only save lives, but save truck driver livelihoods, and I thank the chair for the opportunity to testify before you today, and I'm pleased to answer any questions, in the most challenging ones as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Young. We want to proceed now with questions from members. Each member will have 5 minutes, and I will begin by recognizing myself. Just leaving off, Mr. Young, where you left us, let me again thank those who are here who have had loved ones lost in crashes of various kinds. This hearing is first and foremost about finding answers. I heard your testimony about underride guards, Mr. Young. Let me ask Mr. Spear, because prior to being at ATA, he was with Hyundai, and I'd be very interested in your response, whether you think vehicle crash compatibility is an issue and requires additional considerations on the part of the companies, and how you would respond.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. It's a real issue. I had the opportunity to meet with a number of the advocates of the side underride legislation, not Mr. Young, unfortunately, yet, but a number of the others in the room, and admire them for their passion and opening up this debate. I do think we have a difference of an opinion on how best to get to improve safety, and
your view is how to is what on how?
I think compatibility between cars and trucks is possible. I think Hyundai is a good example. I'm no longer on the payroll, so I think I can say this candidly. They're the only OEM that actually manufactures cars and truck trailers, so they're unique. I don't know of any other OEM in the world that does both. And I am very well aware that they are doing connectivity tests that can utilize automated emergency braking in the vehicle. 2/3 of the accidents that involve trucks are caused by passenger vehicles, largely from speeding and texting. People are paying less attention to what they're doing on the road, and they're hitting the truck. It's a fact. And I think technology has a role to play.
So
Connectivity.
the truck must be prepared to defend itself.
Well, I think connectivity could solve a lot of the problem. If the brakes are applied, even if the driver isn't aware, the car will not hit the trailer. This legislation assumes that an accident is going to happen. The equipment that was shown in the video is at 35 miles an hour. It's my understanding it's not effective beyond 35 miles an hour. Studies, GAO even recommended to you that more study needs to be done on this. The added weight, the structural integrity of the trailer, is it compromised? These are valid questions that I think need to be fleshed out before you proceed with something like this and apply it to all trailers as proposed in the testimony.
Well, thank you very much. It was important to hear from somebody from the industry. I have to ask this question. Ms. Spear, of course, testified about she said a dozen people would be killed before the end of the day. Now, what bothers me is I'm an American, I'm used to things getting better, not worse. I said in my opening testimony that there was a 10% increase in 1 year between 2016 and 17, and 40% increase in 10 years in truck crash fatalities. We have got to understand why this is happening in order to get to a remedy. And so I need some feedback from those of you on the panel. Why are we going the wrong way, and what can be done about it?
I think you can get a number of answers from this panel. I'll begin in brief. I think there are a lot of factors that contribute to the increase. We don't deny it, it is happening. The overall trend over several years, it's going down, but this recent uptick is very alarming.
10 years.
Yeah, I'm going back further, the overall. But I will say the uptick is alarming. I think it's caused because the economy is strong. There's more people at work, there's more people commuting, and quite frankly, the federal government is not investing in infrastructure. There's less room. There's a lot more accidents out there happening as a result of the lack of infrastructure investment in this country. And we're still out there moving the freight. 71% of the domestic freight in this country is moved by truck. Those demands don't go away. So we have to find ways to be safer given the current decaying infrastructure that we're being dealt.
Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Yes, I would jump in on this. Realistically, what looking at the data shows is there is a disconnect between compliance with the regulations and improved safety outcomes. Most of the regulations that are enforced that make up CSA don't have anything to do with safety, but that's been the entire focus. The operating environment for truck drivers have become much, much more stressful. The one thing the ELD did was make drivers feel like they're constantly under pressure, being watched every minute. It exacerbated the shortages of places for truckers to park that we've had for 20 years. Those are the kinds of things that are essential to actually improving commercial vehicle safety. You have to have experienced, knowledgeable drivers. The other net effect of many of the regulations is more and more drivers have simply said, there are other things that I could do. They've retired, they've left our industry. They will be replaced with some level of new people that will be less skilled and more likely to be involved in crashes.
That's for sure, and no specific time yet behind the wheel to get a CDL license. Thank you very much. My time has expired. I go to our ranking member, Mr. Davis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you again to the witnesses. Mr. Craig, thanks for your hospitality, for a couple of tours of your facilities up in the Chicagoland area. Please offer my best to the team at C.H. Robinson. Mr. Spear, I'm going to come to you first, but I do want to note this subcommittee has 56 members on it. It's probably the most geographically diverse committee or subcommittee in this entire Congress. While I can appreciate the urban needs of the Chair Norton, my district's mostly rural. My district has many rural roads where many of your carriers are moving freight all around. As a matter of fact, I've got about 7,750 farms producing almost $400 million in grain exports. every single year. These farmers obviously rely upon our nation's infrastructure and rely upon our transportation to get their commodities to the marketplace and get them out into the global marketplace. My question is, what can we as policymakers do to ensure our farmers continue to have access to the markets that they need? So that being said, I want to drill it down a little bit further. Mr. Spear, I noticed that ATA's priorities for a surface reauthorization bill, that you, in your priorities, you believe motor carriers should be allowed to conduct marijuana testing of operators. In Illinois, the state legislature just recently signed into law the legal use of recreational marijuana. So there's no doubt that this is a concern for the industry and a concern for this committee. Can you expand on the intersection of marijuana consumption and the trucking industry and what we can do at the federal level to improve safety?
We fall under the federal requirements for drug testing, not states. And obviously the use of marijuana, impairment from marijuana, opioids, these are all concerns to our industry and are added headwind in terms of attracting talent in. And 9 states plus a district, as well as Canada, now legalizing recreational marijuana, is going to put added strain, added pressure on the industry and its ability to hire people that are drug-free. We simply cannot have that in this industry. You cannot have people that are using controlled substances that are impaired, operating 80,000-pound equipment, or tanks full of chemicals or petrol. Okay, it is a problem that the states, we don't believe, are taking into consideration. And there is no technology out there that allows you, an officer, to pull someone over and test for an impairment of marijuana as they do for alcohol. You can do a breathalyzer instantaneously. That technology doesn't exist yet for marijuana.
So you're not aware of anyone testing any technology that would be able to do that like a breathalyzer does for alcohol?
I think it's coming. It's probably maybe 3-5 years out from what I'm told. But the best we can do right now is on the front end screening when hiring. Hair testing should be a viable means in lieu of urinalysis. It gives you a better picture to see if that individual is a user. And that conversation should happen before that driver is hired. And it's something that you all put into the FAST Act. It's been sitting over at HHS for 3 years. They haven't kicked out their requirements so the DOT can move forward. DOT is ready to move forward on this. It's an alternate. It's not a mandate. You can do either or. And I think as we move in this direction where we're legalizing recreational marijuana, we've got opioid use in every community in the country, it seems. Our industry has to operate safe, and we need the tools to do it. So we put it back on you to help us with that. Get on HHS, get this thing done and out. We will work with innovators to come up with immediate ways to test. This is a problem. It's not going away.
Are you seeing in the states that have already legalized recreational use of marijuana even more of a shortage of drivers being willing to take some of the opportunities that are available in the industry?
Absolutely. We have several carrier members that pay the extra expense to do hair testing in addition to the urinalysis. And when the driver comes in and applies and they know they're going to have to take a hair test, a lot of them just walk right out the door. If they are using marijuana, they don't even go forward with the test. So we know this is a problem.
Well, thank you. I just want to also note something. I don't expect anybody to be able to have to answer this, but earlier this week I had a constituent in my office. He's a civil engineer. He conducts friction tests on pavement in the Chicagoland area up along the tollways. And to complete these tests, he has to drive his Ford F-350 with a trailer, about 1,200 pounds, 3 hours to get to the Chicago area, sits around for about 7 hours waiting for traffic to die down, and by the time he gets out onto the workplace, he's only got about 4 hours because of the hours of service rules that he can actually do his job. I don't think the rules that we pass in this committee, the bills that we've passed and signed into law, ever intended for somebody like that to be impacted the way he is. I think it's something that this committee and subcommittee needs to take a look at in the future, and I certainly hope that the panelists would agree. Thank you very much. I yield back no time because I have none, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. I recognize the chair of the full committee, Mr. DeFazio.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I'd just like to delve into the whether or not we have a shortage of truck drivers or people willing to undertake truck driving, or is it problems within the industry that are causing tremendous turnover, which make it appear that we have a shortage? So, as I understand, the Teamsters in their master agreement have essentially detention time placed.
Yes, we do.
Okay, so what kind of turnover do you have?
We have, and thank you for the question, we have very low turnover, certainly less than 10%. I think it's largely related to compensation and having very good working conditions relative to the industry.
Okay, Mr. Spencer, would you comment on the independent truck drivers' experience with detention time and whether or not that's causing a problem for entrants or people moving out of the industry?
It is a monstrous problem that has actually cost trucking specifically as much as $3 billion a year, in society over $5 billion. But the way it plays out is it means driver work weeks are always going to be 70 to 80 hours and sometimes longer. Now, they're not always working all of those hours, but their time is being controlled by others. And the biggest bandits on that deal are going to be shippers and receivers. And I should point out that these folks, even now, in some instances, have the gall to actually charge drivers for late deliveries.
And how tightly are they scheduling people? I mean, that's the first time I've heard about that.
Oh, yeah. Well, actually, Walmart started doing it more than a year ago, made quite a noise doing it. Having said that, the dilemma that drivers have, they're asked to work around everyone else's schedules. They voluntarily choose to try to stay out of traffic congestion as much as they possibly can to accommodate everyone. They don't have their time. The rigidity of the regulations sometimes forces them to do things that they don't want to do. But,
all right.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Chair, can I jump?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, the detention time is really key. I mean, the shippers and the receivers aren't regulated like the truck driver. So ultimately, the shippers and receivers can abuse the entire Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulatory Code and then ultimately try to escape liability, which would not be a good thing, because they're the ones that have put the pressure on these poor truck drivers. And it's really important that the shippers and receivers hold on to some of that responsibility, and it starts with detention time. We need to eliminate some of these late fees with just-in-time shipping, eliminate detention time. With ELDs, we should know and be able to figure out which are the major abusers. Thank you for the time.
Mr. Chairman?
Okay, yes.
May I add a comment to that? It struck me as I went on the ride-along that I mentioned earlier that while we were sitting there waiting for the load both to arrive and to be loaded, that I was getting paid, but the truck driver was not, which there was some irony in that. I also just wanted to mention and ask for your permission, Madam Chairwoman, for this study to be submitted to the record.
So ordered.
Thank you. There's a study from March of 2019 from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and Advocates does not have an independent economist, but we rely on the studies of everyone else, and I just wanted to mention this quote. While we do use ATA data to identify one segment of the trucking labor market, long-distance truckload motor freight, that has experienced high and persistent turnover rates for decades, the overall picture is consistent with a market in which labor supply responds to increasing labor demand over time, and a deeper look does not find evidence of a secular shortage. So I found that study to be completely telling.
Thank you. To the Pepsi testimony on the 102,000-pound truck, I think, in Canada, would that truck, I don't believe, would, even with 6 axles, would meet our bridge formula in the U.S.? Do they have different bridges?
Correct. In our proposal, we're only proposing the 91,000 pound, not the 102.5. Now,
Okay. What would be the comparison of a stopping distance of a 91,000-pound 6-axle truck to an 80,000-pound 5-axle truck?
when we looked at the study shows that with adding the extra axle, adds the extra brake, it's a 1 foot shorter stopping distance on that vehicle.
Okay. Now, of course, one issue here is reaction time. I mean, and without automated braking, I mean, do you support the idea that we should move to automated systems to, get the braking going faster?
At PepsiCo, obviously, all the safety features that we have, safety is paramount.
Okay.
So it's not just in conjunction of just reaction, but we've got to do more, and we have done more to add to our trucks all the different safety features, just like the collision mitigations, the lane departures, blind spot, the headlights, backup cameras, anti-lock brakes, traction control, stability control, and driver training. So I think all of that in conjunction enables a safer fleet, but it can't be just one or the other.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. My time's expired.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Gibbs.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Spencer, the FAST Act required that regarding the analysis of violations and other safety data under the Compliance Safety Accountability CSA's program be removed from public view until the deficiencies identified by the National Academy of Sciences study were addressed. To your knowledge, have the recommendations of the National Academy of Sciences been fully implemented? The report, can you comment on what's the status, Mr. Spencer?
I understand that those issues are being addressed and tweaked now. As I said in my earlier comments, that what we see is the big connect between relying on these particular regulations and actually safety. Regulations track compliance, but they don't really measure or actually identify safe, unsafe, and that's been mentioned several times here today. We're optimistic and get a little bit better, but we think there needs to be a different focus on what we enforce. And again, about the last thing that we want to be doing is causing experienced drivers to leave trucking, and we have that right now for lots of reasons.
No, I agree with you. I don't think they should be made public until we've fixed that system or change it or whatever, because I think it hasn't been fair to the drivers, and you concur with that, right? It shouldn't be made public, no doubt.
All the way along, no one can rely on that data, that information as an indicator of safety. In fact, early on, some of the basics were compared with crashes, and FMCSA identified those that had more violations had fewer crashes. That's not been fixed.
Yeah. Mr. Young, you noted in your testimony regarding the motor carrier selection standard, and that it's really pointless, and you're concerned about the providing cover to the brokers and shippers. Can you expound a little bit on that a little bit? Because my understanding is, we've got 1,700 or so brokers and shippers, and 3 or 4 million carriers. And what this legislation would do is require that to make sure that when the brokers are hiring carriers, that they meet some minimum standards, like they have insurance, they have a good safety record, and in your testimony, you kind of said it was pointless, and so you can expound that to I understand that a little bit better.
Yes, and you missed the comments earlier. I want to thank you for your warm welcome again. I'm proud to be one of your constituents. Very briefly, the way that the current system is set up is that the brokers and shippers need to be looking at the driver scores and the motor carrier scores, in particular the out-of-service percentages, in my opinion. Not just simply the basics, the behavioral analysis, safety improvement categories, and those 640 infractions that are part of those categories. But if the out-of-service percentages are exceeding the national averages, the broker shouldn't be allowed to hire those particular folks or escape liability from hiring those particular folks when they're involved in a crash. As I indicated also in my oral testimony, 10% of the motor carriers represent close to 50% of all the crashes. So the brokers and the public needs to know what these scores are and these safety scores in order to avoid those 10% bad apples, and then so that they don't hire them. And if they don't have a rating, because as we heard from Chair Norton, about 86% don't have ratings, or if the ratings don't exist or there's not enough information available, then the brokers and shippers should take it upon themselves. C.H. Robinson used to have a safety questionnaire and audit that was included as part of their survey in order to get a motor carrier to sign on with them. It's my understanding that that's no longer part of their overall system, so it's really important that the brokers and shippers are not hiring these 10% bad apples, spoiling the bunch, or creating multiple fatality situations.
Now, this data you refer to, is this a separate than from the CSA, or?
It's a both, quite frankly. So the brokers and shippers were trying to escape liability in this last Congress in this session, and it's anticipated that it's going to come up again. And it's important to not allow shippers, brokers to escape liability, particularly when they're the ones perpetuating cheaper freight rates. So safety must not be sacrificed for cheaper freight rates. So really, it's these 10% of bad apples and motor carriers that the broker and shipper needs to be aware of. And quite frankly, it's the broker and shipper that puts the pressure on the industry. So if the broker and
I
shipper...
only got 10 seconds, but I was just concerned.
My apologies.
That's fine. On the CSA, where do you come down on that? Is that a broken system? Has it been unfair? Has it been fair? What do you see on that?
I think it's a good system from the standpoint that it helps provide something as opposed to nothing.
Okay, my time's out. I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Cohen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate you and Ranking Member Davis holding this important hearing, and thank the witnesses for being here. One important issue that I've worked on and would like to return to, I know it's been discussed, is truck underride crashes. Circumstances wherein all the passenger safety mechanisms placed in passenger vehicles are effectively rendered null and void when striking the rear, side, or front of a semi-truck tractor trailer. Sadly, in 2014, Randy and Laurie Higginbotham of my community lost their 33-year-old son, Michael, to an accident of this type, as thousands of others have, and it was unnecessary. Unfortunately, this is an issue that has been on the industry's radar for decades, yet little action has been taken. Policies to prevent this are long overdue. Ms. Chase, I know you discussed this earlier. You mentioned in your testimony in 2017, large truck crash fatalities took 4,761 lives, a 9% increase from the previous year, and an increase of 41% since 2009. That same year, 2017, there were 148,000 individuals injured in large truck crashes. Of those injuries, some of the most debilitating came because of truck underride crashes. Can you expound on your testimony and suggest what Congress can do to effectively cure this problem?
Yes, thank you for your question, Congressman. And thank you also for your leadership on the underride issue. We are very grateful that you have introduced legislation to help eradicate this horrific and violent type of crash. I think that the video that Mr. Young showed was very telling. There's just no escaping the laws of gravity and of physics. And when there is a proven solution, such as an underride guard, we would really encourage Congress to require the Department of Transportation to issue a final rule, a performance standard, that would require this problem to be solved. We have the solutions, we just need the leadership to make it happen. In addition, I also outlined a couple of other technologies that are proven and on the roads today, such as automatic emergency braking, and a few of the other witnesses also mentioned it, that should be standard technology in all cars.
Thank you so much, and I appreciate your mention of my quote-unquote leadership. It's unfortunate that I have that leadership. It's not because of any particular study or knowledge, it's because the constituents were sadly had their lives changed when their son was killed, and it could have happened to anybody in this committee, and if it would have happened to anybody in this committee, they would be in favor of changing this law as well. It just has to come home. Mr. Young, based on your unique experience as an owner-operators Independent Drivers Association member and an attorney, do you believe industry will voluntarily self-regulate for the sake of safety on this matter, or do you believe they need to be brought to the table?
I believe there needs to be a mandate. This has been a 60-year problem that began in 1953, and it still hasn't been solved. While the industry protects the back of the guards, but not effectively, why not the back of a semi-trailer? Why not the sides as well? We have the entire open sides, and we're talking about crumple zones, airbags, energy-absorbing bumpers, and seat belts. I mean, there's a ton of safety and data that has gone into the crashworthiness of cars and protecting those occupants, but the bumpers have to match up in order for that to work. I don't see the industry doing this without a mandate.
Thank you, sir. Additional issue I've worked on and would like to bring to the attention and ask some questions is about double-deck livestock trailers that transport horses in interstate commerce. This remains largely legal in this country. Double-deck trailers with horses crammed inside have tipped over and been implicated in accidents, in part because the animals can't retain their balance. They have enough trouble at Santa Anita when they're running and leading to dangerous situations on the road. In one particularly gruesome accident in Illinois, 59 horses were being transported in a double-deck trailer. It crashed. Numerous horses were left dead, while authorities work for hours to rescue surviving animals from the wreckage. Simply no reason to put the safety of other drivers and passengers on the road at risk, as well as the welfare of the horses being transported in these conditions when trailers are specifically designed for and can accommodate horses. Mr. Young, once again, based on your experience, attorney, owner, operator group, do you think this is a worthy issue for inclusion in the highway safety and transportation laws?
I believe it's a worthy issue because we're talking about the high center of gravity. My truck company used to run scrap hauling boxes with a power takeoff unit, and those scrap hauling boxes have such a high center of gravity that when I went to OI to ask for insurance on it, they said, well, we don't even insure high center of gravity boxes like that or the power takeoff unit for those scrap hauling boxes. So when you're talking about something with high center of gravity like the horse trailers, then that is definitely a safety initiative. And if our goal is to get to Vision Zero and truly get to Vision Zero, then yeah, it needs to be included.
Thank you. Appreciate the panel, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cohen. Mr. Massey.
Madam Chair, I yield my time to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Webster.
Mr. Webster is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Massey, for yielding. Let's see, Mr. Noble, were you the one with the slide and showed the trailers with their weight?
Yes, sir.
Does the weight, the 80,000 pounds, does that include the weight of the trailer and the cargo?
Yes, it does.
Okay, so Mr. Noble, Mr. Spear, let me ask you, is there anyone in your arena, I know you also cover the trailer manufacturers, are they working on anything that would make a lighter trailer? I've done a lot of study for resilient construction dealing with composites, but it didn't have to do necessarily with building trailers. It had to do more with possibly using them for I-beams on bridges and so forth. But if you had a lighter trailer, you could carry more weight. Is that correct? And still have the same weight?
The weight of the vehicle, generally, as the rules are written, discount the weight of the trailer and truck. So that's not counted against the capacity. When it's 80,000 pounds, it's 80,000 pounds of what you're carrying. There's always investments in the trailer to make it, stronger, lighter. There are limits to that, obviously, that you don't want to compromise the integrity of the trailer either. There are standards that it has to uphold to, that it has to meet.
Yes, well, they're the same size I-beam that's a composite is stronger than steel, so that wouldn't be the problem. So wouldn't that, though, be a case for proving that if you had a lighter trailer, it seems like the idea of trailer weight and so forth, if it's not included, then the cargo itself could be more, even though you were going beyond the capacity. You would not be adding anything to the weight on the road. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Is there any thought of that?
Well, certainly. Obviously, size and weight, length and weight haven't been changed federally since 1982. So you have a mixed match now since that time of states that have been given exemptions. So you have a various degree of weight and length configurations throughout the country. It's just a quilt of limits that are permitted. So as your manufacturer, you've got to meet a federal limit. Obviously, we're interstate commerce, so we're jumping state to state all the time. So if you go from one state that allows it to another that doesn't, that equipment's not going to be as useful to the carrier. So they're generally designing standards that are interstate based. Unless you're running regional, like in the West, you can run a number of configurations to weight as well as length. You've got Rocky Mountain doubles, you've got triples, triple 28s. Those are not uncommon equipment used in various states. So you have to take into account the patchwork of configurations that state laws now permit. The manufacturer now has to work with the carrier to design equipment that meets their customer needs. Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes sense. However, we don't do state to state. We do give waivers, I assume. But the point is, if the trailer and the cargo weight were combined, which you probably should be if you're talking about what's going to tear up the roads or be unsafe or whatever, it seems like those two two combinations should add up to really what weight we allow on the roads. And the point is, you could, if you did a much investment possibly in a lighter trailer with composite material, you could get to a point where you would be able to have more cargo, really the same impact on the road, though. Do you think that's true?
Yeah, I think there's evidence to show that without compromising safety. I think the stoppage distance is exhibited in previous answers to questions. It's well documented, it's well tested.
I mean, the stoppage distance is going to be governed by the overall weight, no matter what. Even if we don't count that as the weight of the trailer, as part of the weight that you can carry on the road, still, when you come to stopping, you got to include that in to whatever calculation you're making in whatever time you can stop. Do you know what the weight of a trailer is? I don't know. Do you?
It varies. I mean, there's so many different configurations, 28s to 48s to 53s. You got tank, flatbed. I mean, it depends on what you're hauling.
Okay. Well, if you're not hauling anything, it's just Mr. Brock, do you know?
Yes, if I may, we've been working on lightweight trailers because obviously our products with Pepsi is heavy. So we have been lightweighting our trailers for many years. So that trailer is around that 15,000 pounds. So any more cargo, but we still have empty space on the trailer. So one of the ideas that we've proposed in the SHIP Coalition is by putting more cargo, allowing more weight on that single trailer, we're not asking for more length on the trailer, but on that single trailer, then we can move more product with less miles, less accidents. So when we look at the weight and still be bridge compliant. So all the efforts that you're talking about is lightweighting trailers to increase the cargo space and move it safely is what we are looking to do.
Thank you very much. Yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Webster. Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Ranking Member Davis, for hosting this very salient hearing today, and thank you to the witnesses for your testimony. The American trucking industry is rapidly evolving and complex as this Congress looks to pass sweeping surface transportation legislation and a robust infrastructure package. We are tasked with considering both the effects of trucking on our roads, jobs, economy, and more, as well as federal and regulatory input on the trucking industry. More than ever, as our trucks are getting larger and heavier, more technologically advanced, and seek to travel further distances, we must ensure that those behind the wheel and those who share the road are optimally safe. I look forward to engaging the bevy of transportation professionals here today to achieve safer roads and regulations for all. Mr. Spencer, your testimony illuminates the concern that heavy regulation on truck drivers may color the trucking industry, that it could get an undeserved reputation as a field with unappealing and unsafe work. With retention rates already under threat, there is valid concern that entry to the trucking workforce may be hindered. How can we improve working conditions to attract and retain drivers in a rapidly evolving industry?
Maybe the reason drivers stay is because of pay, benefits, and working conditions. The reasons they leave are for the lack thereof. Many of the regulations that are on the books today hold drivers accountable for everything that could possibly go wrong, but none of those really address the frustrations and the lost time that drivers will spend in shipping and receiving facilities. Again, we're talking about anywhere from 10 to as much as 45 hours a week, every week. That puts the work week for a truck driver at 80, sometimes more hours per week. When somebody's considering an occupation, a career, do they take one that works 40 or 45 hours a week where you're home, or one that's 80 hours or more and you're away from home and you don't make more money? I don't think that's a real I don't think that's a real tough decision. People are going to make the decision that works best for them, and who can blame them? We have to address the economic issues for drivers, how they're paid, and the quirks that allow them to actually work unlimited hours without any kind of an overtime compensation. The market can't fix that kind of stuff if drivers are paid nothing for their time, and the vast majority are paid nothing for their time right now.
Are you seeing any indication that younger drivers are eager to enter the trucking workforce?
Actually, I've never really seen instances in my career in trucking where this was immediately attractive to young people. And trucking isn't, I mean, I entered trucking in my mid-20s. I became a truck owner at 26. Generally, people that enter trucking today are doing it because of issues with another job, another career they had. They look for something better. In theory, a trucking career is appealing because it's all about productivity, and if you're willing to work, a reasonable person would assume they'll get ahead. What too many figure out really, really quick is that everybody is working their tails off and they're not getting ahead, and it doesn't look like it's ever going to change.
Would you say that there are specific protections that should be put in place for 18 to 21-year-old drivers?
Our organization is not a proponent of lowering the permissible driving age for commercial drivers below 21. And, everything about this committee is about safety. When we look at the numbers of crashes, of where crashes take place, and the drivers, you don't take that age down, you take it up. You take it up to at least 25, which is largely what it was back in the 70s when I entered trucking.
Let me ask Mr. Byrd this. Would you agree with that?
I would agree that we don't support lowering the age for drivers in commercial trucking. One of the approaches that we've used to attract young workers to the trucking industry is establishing an apprenticeship program. So we recruit candidates who are 18, 19 years old, and we teach them about the trucking industry, the transportation industry, working in the dock, and working various other aspects of the trucking industry, shifting, working in the yard. And as they approach 21 years old, we've, by that time, given them significant seat time on ranges and taught them how to properly drive and prepare them for working in the industry. So that's been our approach.
All right. Mr. Spear, you raising your hand?
I'd like to give, if time permits, Madam Chair, just an alternative view to this question. 18 to 21-year-olds are already legally allowed to drive a Class 8 in 48 states, okay? It's current law. I'd love to know where the opponents on this panel were when those 48 states passed those laws. I didn't hear anything from them. But they're quick to point out that federally, we shouldn't do it. Shouldn't do it. Bottom line, the Drive Safe Act, the reason a quarter of the House and Senate, bipartisan, members like Ms. Jackson Lee, understands why co-sponsoring this matters, because it's safer. 400 hours of apprenticeship-based training, of which 240 of those hours have to have an experienced driver in the cab with the 18 to 21-year-old. It has to have speed governors, cameras, anti-collision mitigation systems. None of the 48 states have any of that currently. This is a step towards safety, not away. And I'd love to know where the members and the opponents of this bill, 18 to 21-year-olds, are on our military. I was just on the Abraham Lincoln. It's over in the Gulf now. Over 5,000 sailors on that aircraft carrier, Madam Chairman, and the average age is 19. When I was up on the captain's deck, he gave an order for a 20-degree right rudder. And I heard a 19-year-old female sailor at the helm take that order. Right degree? Aye, sir. 19 years old she was, steering a $4 billion aircraft carrier. 90 aircraft worth $30 million apiece, 2 nuclear reactors, and 104,000 tons of displacement. I think if we can teach somebody to steer an aircraft carrier, I'm pretty sure we can teach them how to cross state lines in a Class 8.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Your time has expired. I should note that a military pilot test is going on as I speak. I appreciate your raising that, and your note about 48 states or 47 states should indicate that they can only drive in the state. And the issue for us is across the states where we still have work to do. Mr. Babin. Put on your microphone, please.
I'm sorry. Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. Under the Trump administration, FMCSA has rightfully withdrawn rulemakings related to sleep apnea, safety fitness determination, and minimum insurance limits. The agency has also categorized the speed limiter mandate as a long-term action, which essentially places it on the back burner. I wanted to ask you the first question, Mr. Spencer. Do you and your members support these types of actions, and are there additional regulatory or rather deregulatory actions that the federal government could take to help make trucking a more viable career without jeopardizing safety, such as modernizing today's rigid and convoluted hours of service requirements?
Thank you, Congressman. I can tell you that our members, small business truckers, the small business trucker industry, really embraces the idea of regulatory reform. Most of the as I mentioned in my testimony earlier, we see a tremendous disconnect between the regulations and actual safety. And that's but the focus is enforcing on regulations, and some of those are clearly counterproductive. You mentioned sleep apnea specifically, and I know some are focused on that as the big bugaboo now, but it doesn't cause drivers to crash trucks. And what happened when we had increased focus, increased enforcement, and this was all economically driven, we put a lot of those guys out of trucking. And as a result, we believe that is a contributor to fatalities on the road going up. Our organization would like to see a wholesale review of all of the truck safety regulations. And if there isn't a connection to crashes, why are we wasting time, money, and effort on enforcing it? Focus on those things that do have something to do with crashes. We'll get a better bang for our buck, and we're tickled the administration is pursuing that.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And then secondly, Mr. Spear had mentioned veterans and active duty personnel. In my district, a truck driver that doesn't have a transportation worker identification credential or a TWIC card is essentially no truck driver at all. Drivers need this card to gain access to the Port of Houston, which I represent, and all the petrochemical facilities that I represent, the highest concentration in the United States. As we face a nationwide truck driver shortage, any backlog and delay in the TWIC card approval process is only exacerbating the problem. And I am introducing a bill this very day to allow TSA to provide provisional temporary TWIC cards within a day or so of application to honorably discharge veterans while their background checks are being processed so that they don't have to wait potentially months before they can drive. Surely if these veterans recently passed rigorous security screening so they could drive trucks on bases in Afghanistan, they should not be waiting months for approval for a TWIC card. And now these are veterans who have had driver experience. And I would ask if anyone on the panel today thinks that it's a dangerous or bad idea for an honorably discharged veteran with truck driving experience to qualify to get a provisional TWIC card on the day they apply. And does anyone believe that this idea will help address driver shortages and veteran unemployment rates, among other issues? I guess, Mr. Spear, I'm going to ask you first.
Well, thank you for dropping the bill. I can tell you right now from your description, we'd be first in line to support it. I have testified on this issue before in the Senate. It's been 18 years since 9/11. 18 years. And our own TSA can't produce a common access card like DOD has. DOD recognizes the TWIC card. If you're a driver with a TWIC card, you can get on any military base
That's right.
in the country. But you go to any other facility that's hazardous, it's not recognizable because TSA hasn't come out with a standard. They keep changing the rules. Administration, I can point fingers at both sides of this. It is absolutely certain. The burden that comes back to our drivers to have to obtain a TWIC card, the cost associated with it, the time associated with it, it's ridiculous. I testified in the Senate. I served in a couple war zones, Iraq included. And I'm amazed that in the green zone in Baghdad, the Iraqi government can come up with an ID that's almost identical to the DoD Common Access Card. Now, Iraq is not known as a bastion of efficiency. But if these guys can come up with a common access card and our own TSA can't do it in 18 years' time, what does that say? I applaud you for the bill.
Thank you very much. And I see my time's expired, but
Representative Babin, I'd like to chime in on the speed limiters and sleep apnea issue. My Peterbilt 359 actually has a speed limit. It's under the 70 mile an hour in the state of Ohio. My physique required my medical card physician to require me to take a sleep test. Fortunately, I passed it. I don't need to have it. It's really not sleep apnea that causes accidents. It's the fact that sleep apnea causes folks to be drowsy and not get enough sleep and remain alert behind the wheel. There's a lot of medicine behind this and medical doctors that support it, including my own doctor said, hey, if you have sleep apnea, it's better for your heart condition to make sure that you have a CPAP, et cetera. And I think the drivers that have CPAPs subscribe to it, like it, and then agree that it makes them more alert behind the wheels. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Babin's time has expired. Mr. Garcia.
Thank you, Chair Norton and Ranking Member Graves for organizing this hearing. 2017 was a record for Chicago and the nation for roadway fatalities. I want to ask a question about emergency braking, but I'd like to preface it with some statistics. According to the federal crash data from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, from 2009 to 2017, truck crashes in which a truck was rear-ended a passenger vehicle increased by 50%, despite the availability of new safety technologies like forward collision warning systems and automatic emergency braking that help prevent such crashes. For example, Schneider National saw a 68% decrease in rear-end crashes and a 95% reduction in rear-end collisions claims since it began equipping collision mitigation systems in 2012. Another company, Conway, conducted an internal study which reviewed AEB, electronic stability control, and lane departure warning. They found a 71% reduction in rear-end collisions and a 63% decrease in unsafe following behaviors with the safety features. In fact, some of the most popular truck models like Volvo VNL 760, the Peterbilt 579, the Freightliner Cascadia, the Mack Anthem, and every new international truck now include AEB as standard. Mr. Young and Ms. Chase, briefly, please, do the Truck Safety Coalition or the Advocates for Highway Safety support requiring original equipment manufacturers to manufacture new trucks with AEB technology?
Thank you for the question. Thank you for the question, Congressman. Yes, we absolutely support automatic emergency braking as standard equipment. In fact, in 2015, advocates, together with Truck Safety Coalition and some other organizations, petitioned the Department of Transportation to conduct a rulemaking that would require FCAM, also now known as AEB, in all trucks. This is technology that has been proven to be successful, and there's no reason that it shouldn't be in all trucks today.
Mr. Young?
Yes, while the manufacturers indicate that they've made them standard, there's a delete credit. So if a dealer tells the motor carrier who's purchasing a vehicle, hey, I can make it cheaper for you just to delete the AEB. That's why we need an AEB mandate. Because the original equipment manufacturers have made it standard doesn't mean it's getting on these trucks. And these will truly prevent crashes along with speed limiters and many of the other issues we're talking about.
And again, to both of you, thank you for that. Would your organization support legislation that would require all motor carriers to require their trucks be equipped with AEB to use this crash prevention and mitigation technology?
Absolutely, because of the fact that you have this front override or front underride, this and along with the underride bill will prevent these crashes. So it's an and both type of a scenario.
Thank you. Ms. Chase?
Yes, absolutely, we would support that.
Okay, thank you. Changing gears to trucking insurance minimums. To both of you, again, the cost of medical care and other expenses has increased in the last 40 years, as has inflation. Still, no change in 4 decades has been made to trucking insurance minimums since 1980, and the current insurance cap is $750,000. Is that correct? And do you think that the current level of insurance is sufficient to fully compensate families and ensure safety in the event of a crash involving a truck? And would your organization support adjusting truck insurance minimums?
Thank you for the question. The insurance minimums are grossly inadequate. As you indicated, it's been nearly 40 years. So it was originally set in 1980. If we adjust it to inflation, the minimum insurance should be $2.4 million. In addition to that, the money that is the premium is for the first $1 million or the lower level. It isn't a double in the coverage in order to get double the coverage. So you don't have to pay double the premium to get double the coverage. So an increased insurance minimum will protect families, in particular, even truck drivers who are killed by other negligent truck drivers. And then when you have a situation where there's multiple fatalities, which we hear about on a regular basis, there isn't enough insurance for all the folks there. So then the taxpayer gets saddled with having to take care of these people through Medicare or Medicaid and Social Security disability if there's injuries.
Thank you. Ms. Chase, very briefly.
As our board is comprised of half of insurance companies, we don't take a position on this issue.
Okay, thank you. And lastly, Mr. Byrd from the Teamsters. In your statement, you mentioned that the potential expansion of the short haul exemption from 12 hours to 14 hours is a problem. Can you tell us why expanding it would be bad for workers?
Thank you for the question. Well, drivers in CDL qualified drivers, they're driving larger trucks. They're delivering more freight. They're delivering heavier freight than, say, for short haul operators that are driving vehicles that weigh less than 26,001 pounds. So what that's going to result in, we believe, is that these drivers they'll work longer hours, they'll handle more freight, they'll handle heavier freight, and it'll put them at increased risk of experiencing musculoskeletal disorders, for example. And one of our big concerns is that along with that, we have an aging driver workforce among our membership. So you've got older drivers who would be called upon to do more work, to do heavy work, and we are concerned that it could have an adverse impact in terms of them experiencing injuries.
Thank you. I yield back, ma'am.
Mr. Garcia's time has expired. Mr. Lamalfa.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I got a lot of car drivers that want to ask me this one here. Does California have a special 55.1 mile per hour speed limiter when trucks are on the 4-lane freeway passing each other doing those 4-mile-long turtle races? You don't have to answer that, but there's a lot of frustrated car drivers getting behind those turtle races when they're going 55.1 for about 4 miles. Anyway, what I'm going to jump to here is the FET tax and a repeal we're working on. The FET on new trucks is 12%, which is higher than alcohol and tobacco sin taxes in most states. This tax has been around 100 years. It was in place to help pay for World War I. It doesn't really generate that much money. It adds about $20,000 in costs to new trucks. And so when we're trying to incentivize people to get newer, cleaner burning, more safe trucks, that seems like that's an opposite effect. It's really going to be huge for jobs and for injecting more into the truck builders economy, as well as putting safer, nicer rigs on the highway. So, Mr. Noble, Mr. Spear, do you think repealing this tax would lead to an increase in purchases of these cleaner, safer, nicer trucks?
I don't necessarily have an opinion on if the tax is repealed, of how that would affect, from a PepsiCo standpoint, emissions. It's not about necessarily expense of the equipment. It's the right thing to do from a from an emission reduction and investing in technology for the right business reasons.
All right, no opinion?
No opinion.
Okay.
Yeah, we would favor repealing it. As you said, it's 1917. And of those taxes that were put forward at that time for World War I funding, this is the only one that still stands as law. All the others went away. I don't know what the history is behind that and why ours is the only one that still remains intact, but it isn't just, and it is an inhibitor of buying new, safer, more environmentally friendly equipment. And it's a serious number. If you're purchasing a truck brand new, this is an issue. So we'd strongly recommend that it be repealed. We also understand that you're working under requirements to offset. We get the budgetary restraints that Congress is under. We'd also work with you when funding an infrastructure bill to find ways to do that, because I think this would be a really good step forward.
We're certainly looking at offsets on that too, but Congress over the decades has kind of turned it on and off over time. But Ms. Chase, Mr. Spencer, based on what you know about these newer trucks, do you think they are safer, more efficient for our network?
I do think that newer trucks have the capability and to be safer, and most certainly they should be equipped with the technologies that I mentioned earlier, such as speed limiters, automatic emergency braking, lane departure warning. And when I just did a ride along last week, I firsthand experienced how safe a truck can be. And so I think that all trucks should be required to be as safe as the one I was in.
Yeah, as long as the speed limiter is not stuck on 55.1 on California freeways, right? I'm stuck. Okay, no, Mr. Spencer.
Specific to California, the point that you make over and over and over is speed-limited trucks, whether they're speed-limited through technology or through artificially low speed limits, simply serve as impediments, barriers to other people trying to drive down the road. And I think it's really, really interesting, too, that we have proponents for making tougher rear-end underride equipment on trailers when we have policies that actually have the net effect of causing more cars to rear-end trucks. I think it's somewhat ironic that we do that. Your question specifically to the federal excise tax, that's money right now that goes into the Highway Trust Fund that has been short for a number of years. As small business truckers, we'd like to see the Highway Trust Fund fully funded through user fees. And simply picking off the user fees that go into there now, we think is sort of short-sighted public policy. We're optimistic that at some point Congress will make the decision to fully fund it.
So I appreciate that. Well, let's shift real quick, Mr. Spencer, to ELDs and flexibility that people are looking for on that. Do you think they are really improving the safety of trucks? You kind of alluded to that before. Are they really improving safety, or is the flexibility actually making people do strange things on ELDs?
Again, my background is trucking. I did it myself. I drove when I drove when I felt like driving. I drove to accommodate weather. I drove to accommodate shippers and receivers. And it wasn't always in blocks of 10 or 11 or 14. Again, what ELDs have done has created the stress level for drivers, but what they've pointed out is the problems that we have with existing hours of service regulations, which there is broad agreement that we need to modify them to provide drivers flexibility.
Yeah, especially with livestock or hazardous materials, the way I see it. If you got, you need to get that extra hour, or you need to get this material somewhere. It isn't, got to take a break. I'm in the middle of I-80 between San Francisco and wherever. It doesn't seem to provide sensible flexibility.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, ma'am.
Amalfa. Your time has expired. Ms. Davis.
Thank you, Chairwoman, Ranking Member, and to all of the witnesses who are here today. I represent the 3rd District in Kansas, which is the Kansas side of the Kansas City metro area. And I'm sure some of you know that KC is the second largest intermodal shipping hub in the United States. And a lot of that is because of the agricultural commodities that we transfer from rural parts of Kansas all over the country. And these are actually the very rural areas that Ranking Member Davis was speaking about earlier, which, you know, I'd like to suggest that the urban-rural divide is maybe not as vast as we might think it is. And when rural Kansas does well, all of urban Kansas does well, and the entire country benefits. So I spent a little bit of time at DOT, and I had the chance to work on autonomous vehicle policy while I was there, and the development of the various types of technologies is something that's really interesting to me. The safety of drivers and of passengers is always of primary concern, as many of you have stated today. I'm also really concerned about making sure that folks aren't being left out of the conversation about automation, that people are still able to make a living. And so I'd like to ask some of our witnesses today if you can talk to me a little bit about what you think intentional implementation of autonomous systems looks like, whether that be the braking systems or other types of autonomous implementation. So I'd like to ask Mr. Spear, Spencer, Bird, or Mr. Noble, depending on the time, all of you, what does that look like to you? What does intentional autonomous vehicle policy look like so that we're taking care of everyone?
Well, I think, and I've served on the Federal Advisory Committee at DOT on this issue and representing trucking interests, and I'm glad for that, because I felt for the longest time, and I've worn the auto hat as well at Hyundai, that trucking was not included in this discussion. And I think we need to be. We're moving 71% of the freight. We're paying half the tab into the trust fund. We've got skin in this game. And nothing to slight my friends in the autos, but we're not going to hand the whole playbook to them and the DOT to write. We have to be at the table to accommodate what the future is going to look like. Now, that really gets to the heart of it, because I think levels 2, 3, driver assist technology, it's here, it's going to continue to grow. But to go to level 5 with no steering wheel, no pedals, driverless, I get really bullish on this, because I see people reporting on it all the time that we're going to go driverless. And if you're trying to recruit somebody into this industry, if they think their job's going to be gone in 5 years, they're probably going to move on to something else. First of all, it ain't happening. We're not going driverless tomorrow, not 5, not probably even 50 years out. It'll come someday. But we have pilots in planes for a reason. I kind of like that. But not just passenger planes. We have pilots in cargo planes. So you're going to have drivers in trucks for a long time. They're hauling 80,000 pounds. A lot of them are hauling petrol, chemicals. In this secure environment, I don't think you want that driverless. I think you're going to see cars evolve quicker, and they should. 2/3 of the accidents that involve trucks are caused by passenger vehicles, speeding and texting. And that's where AEB coming online and connectivity. That 5.9 gigahertz that National Safety Council and ATA are advocating at FCC, you connect the truck and the trailer with the car, the brake hits, you're not going to be hitting the trailer. It's a different way to get at the side underguards and the rear guards. I'd like to take an approach where the accident doesn't happen at all. That technology assumes you're going to hit the trailer. So connectivity, I think, could solve a lot of the problem and lower the fatality rate and getting us to 0.
Yes.
My perspective of small business truckers, or at least certainly of our organization, is that we recognize the potential for automated systems to tremendously improve highway safety, the potential, but we struggle to separate reality from what are simply marketing claims. And I heard some statistics thrown out a while ago for a big carrier that reports marvelous results with the use of different technologies. Well, I'd heard this stuff before, and I've had our fellows look at the safety data that gets reported to FMCSA, and we don't see any difference in real road safety. So we'd like for small business to be in a position where you have confidence that you can invest in technology that actually really will work.
Thank you. And can I ask that you submit additional comments to the record for our review because my time has expired. But I just want to, I love you bringing up that truckers have not been at the table for the conversations because everyone should be included in the conversation about this. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. Mr. Westerman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd also like to thank all the witnesses for being here today as I listened to your testimony and talking about the vastness of the trucking industry, how it touches all parts of our country. I couldn't help but think about all of our transportation systems here and how they're so interwoven and, with rail and waterways and ships and trucks and planes. We have it all in this country, and it overall, I think, works quite well, probably better than any place else in the world. With the vastness of it and just in trucking by itself, I think it's great to have all the different views at the table. As a matter of fact, as you all gave your testimonies, I started taking notes of where there seemed to be disagreement on issues. I wrote down there's a driver shortage, there's not a driver shortage. ELDs have improved safety, ELDs have worsened safety. Automated and autonomous technologies are good, automated and autonomous technologies are bad. We need more flexibility in hours of service. Flexibility in hours of service is unfair and unsafe. We have an aging driver workforce, and we're forcing experienced drivers out, yet we shouldn't allow younger drivers or apprenticeship programs. We have too many regulations. We need more regulations. Making site-specific or industry-specific weight exemptions or increasing truck volume but not weight would reduce the number of trucks on the road, improving safety and reducing emissions. Increasing weights and volumes or making any exceptions damages infrastructure and decreases safety. So there's no, and I could have taken a lot more notes, there's no end of competing ideas at the table today. I know just talking about the reality of the world outside of D.C. and how we sometimes see things here. I know I can take you to Arkadelphia, Arkansas, in my district. It's got a little 2-lane road running right between 2 college campuses, and they get several hundred log trucks that go down that road because they can't get out on the interstate for just a little ways to get around the town. Now, to me, that's a safety issue. But if there's no room for exemptions or common sense, then we'll continue running log trucks down a 2-lane road between 2 college campuses. So my question, and this is open to anyone who would dare take it, can any of you suggest a safety regulation, a policy change, or an initiative that would improve safety that you think everyone else at the table today would agree with?
I can certainly take that question. I think establishing a motor carrier selection standard would. Mr. Young's suggestion that we use out-of-service rules and eliminate and not use everybody who's more than 50% above the national average indicates the confusion in that area, right? If that's true, then we wouldn't be able to use 50% of the truckers out there. I don't think anybody agrees with that. But the question is the confusion because there's no selection standard. Is that where do we draw the line? Is it 20? Do we eliminate 25% of the carriers? Do we not hire 5%? Do we not hire 8%? If Congress established a motor carrier selection standard, the rules that are enforced now would be enforced across the network, across the transportation freight network by shippers and brokers evenly and exactly like FMCSA and CVSA intended. We would be able to take those carriers off the road.
Mr. Craig confused the testimony that was given. 10% of the motor carriers, just 10% of all motor carriers make up a near 50% of the crashes. And if you look at the out-of-service percentage ratings, which are very clear, if the out-of-service percentage ratings exceed national averages, then you need to look at that carrier a lot closer. You got to give them the strict scrutiny. So you're not accidentally hiring one of these 10% bad apples that ultimately cause these multi-fatality crashes that these folks can't be compensated because minimum insurances are inadequate or because we don't have vehicle crash compatibility with the underride guards. So he did not point out one that we disagree on this issue.
I think it shows the confusion in this area, and establishing a standard would help because right now you don't have to check anything.
As long as the standard does not does not take away or create an immunity for brokers or shippers, because they're the ones that are really pressuring the truck drivers. They're the ones that are putting the late penalties and fines on these folks. The just-in-time shipping, they're the ones not regulated, where the truck driver is accountable. The brokers and shippers need to remain accountable if they're hiring those bad apples, because cheaper freight should not sacrifice safety.
And there is a coercion rule already in place for exactly what Mr. Young is talking about, and the insinuation that cheaper rates equal less safety. 2018 should have been the most safe year on record because rates were at their absolute highest.
I'm out of time, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Westermers. The witness may answer.
I think there would be broad consensus that improved driver training would have a positive outcome, and I think there'd be broad consensus on this panel that that could be positive.
Thank you. Gentleman's time has expired. Mrs. Napolitano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have some concerns that are not being covered yet with the growing problem of misclassification of port drivers, especially in my two biggest ports in the area, Los Angeles and Long Beach, where hundreds of drivers are being forced by unscrupulous trucking companies into working as independent operators as a way for the companies to pay drivers below minimum wage, and then they deny them benefits, creating an unlivable wage for them and their families. These truck drivers are forced to lease trucks at prices they can't afford. Common example is a truck driver being paid $200 a day, but having to pay lease fees of $190 a day, leaving $10 a day. Some of the drivers are actually making less than the leasing costs, and they are in debt. And if a truck driver misses one payment, the truck driver is appropriated, taken from them. It is unthinkable that companies continue to get away with a scheme to underpay truck drivers who are hardworking people. And so consequently, when there's a shortage of truck drivers, you wonder why they leave the type of employment and go to somewhere else to get a better coverage for the families. Mr. Spear, what is the American Trucking Association doing to stop these bad actors?
I appreciate the question, Congresswoman. You and I discussed this at length previously. I promised you I was going to go to the Port of LA. I did that. I visited all 7 terminals, spent a lot of time there looking at the situation. We've also canvassed our members on this issue. I'm unaware of any of our members that are abusing that. I do not deny, however, that it's not happening. And I think for any bad actor that is pressuring drivers into a situation that's not sustainable, that they can't afford the equipment, they're pigeonholed into it, and they can't get out, that's a situation that needs to be remedied. How widespread it is, I honestly, from that visit and those discussions, still do not have a conclusive idea of how widespread this problem is. I think it's fairly isolated. Nonetheless, it's a problem. If it's existing, it needs to be dealt with. And I think working with our federal regulators as well as state, definitely need to coordinate this and understand, how it can be remedied.
Representative, every lease purchase program is that bad situation. It's not just in California. Every time a truck driver gets roped into one of these lease purchase programs where they're promised, hey, we're going to give you keys to a truck, come drive for our company. The next thing you know, all of the money they earn goes into the equity of that truck, and these poor people, these poor truck drivers are then saddled with not being able to take any money home to pay their mortgage or their families. I'd love to get ATA on record saying that they're against the lease purchase programs for the entire industry. I'd love to get that right now.
Or hopefully get banks or credit unions to purchase for them the trucks without having to pay big interest rates. Mr. Noble, Mr. Craig, what are the business community and the broker community doing in your industries to not contract with the trucking companies that use abusive labor practices and misclassify their workers?
Obviously at PepsiCo, we have our own private fleet. So we try to put as much of our freight on our own private fleet that we know, the actors. We know the safety records. We know we have the control. But as you mentioned, 50% of our freight moves with carriers. And we do contract with our friends at C.H. Robinson on that. And so we do depend. And we make sure we're picking the right partner, carrier partner, that is selecting the right carrier to move our freight safely.
Mr. Craig?
Yeah, I would actually point to the new California rule around checking if a carrier has been had a judgment against them on an employment law. That's a great example of how good regulation will work to have the effects on the industry that you're talking about. We check the list that the Department of Labor of California publishes frequently to make sure that we're not hiring those carriers. So
And we have a good enforcement attorney general, Mr. Becerra.
exactly, but the key there is the clear indication of who to hire and who not, and to be able to reinforce the decisions of the California Department of Labor. Absolutely.
Mr. Byrd, do you have any comment, concern over this misclassification?
Yes, I know that we have a port division that works tirelessly to work closely with drivers to ensure that they are properly classified. And it's my understanding that there may have been some litigation and other activities surrounding properly classifying drivers.
Mr. Spear, I hope
Thank you
that we
very
can
much.
continue
Your time has, Mr. Napolitano's time has expired. I'm going to call on Mr. Gallagher. A vote has been called. I asked Mr. Gallagher for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I know we've had some talk about 6 axles, and I know this is bound up in a broader debate we're having about just how to fix funding issues of the Highway Maintenance Trust Fund to fix our roads and bridges. I would highlight the fact that the Minnesota Department of Transportation found that the addition of 6-axle reduces wear and tear on roads by 37%. This allows for an increase in truck weight at the same time, at the same overall dimension as current trucks. USDOT has said they don't have enough information to know the impact of increased truck weight with a 6-axle on our roads, which is why I've joined with many of my colleagues in asking for Congress to authorize a pilot program so we can simply get that information. But a question for Mr. Noble. In Canada, I understand that PepsiCo is already safely operating 91,000-pound 6-axle trucks. Have there been any safety concerns with operating that truck configuration?
Thanks for the question. When we look at Canada, we are hauling over the 91,000 that we're proposing with the Ship Coalition in Canada. Obviously, with that 6-axle does come with the extra braking power that allows it to stop with that 6-axle. We also run that configuration in other countries as well, and most of the developed markets have higher weight limits than what we have that were established in 1983 here in the U.S.
So just to follow up on that, we do have a comprehensive size and weight study from USDOT that says a 91,000-pound 6-axle truck would have a 1.2 billion reduction in annual vehicle miles traveled on U.S. roads. How would that reduction, I mean, if you believe that analysis, in vehicle miles traveled impact PepsiCo?
Any miles that we can save by filling up the capacity on our vehicles, not just at PepsiCo, but any capacity that's wasted. We've talked about driver shortage or driver retention or whatever. If we can eliminate the miles, then we can retain and a better safety record by eliminating that mile. But when you look at the proposal, that, again, when we want the states have heavier weight limits in most states. What we're asking for is allow the 91,000-pound to get off of those local and state roads and put them on the axis of the interstate where they're designed more to do. And that way, you obviously are running in much more, you're not running a lot of valley route miles when you're running state roads and highways, and you're not bypassing the colleges the other congressman was talking about. You're putting them on the safer roads, bypassing the state and local roads, and allowing it to be more safer, less miles.
In addition to safety, I think one of the promising positive externalities of this approach would be the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, as someone who is concerned about climate change. And so I just would hope that we could move forward with the pilot program with the idea that it would result in safer roads and also a healthier climate. I know that my colleague, Mr. Westerman, talked about the ability to allow logging trucks in particular access to federal highways so that they don't have to go on roundabouts and local roads, which itself presents a safety concern. I have a bill that would authorize such a program, and I just would encourage my colleagues on the committee to consider that. I know it's not a silver bullet to our problems, but I think it's one small way where we can authorize pilot programs like this, and giving those logging trucks the ability to navigate on safer routes, I think would, again, increase safety and also result in a more efficient use of fuel for that truck.
That is a perfect example of what we're trying to accomplish with the coalition, with other members like Home Depot, Tyson, that are members of the coalition. Because again, if you can take those heavier weight trucks onto the interstate where they belong, and is where it's designed more for, then you can do that. Every mile you reduce, talking about emissions, every mile is a reduction, saves 2.5 pounds of carbon. You know, so obviously with our emissions that we're trying to save at PepsiCo, not just with electric, but also going to alternative fuels, CNG in our tractors, but also it comes down, the best mile to drive is the miles you don't have to, and eliminating the miles is the best way.
Well, I am out of time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gallagher. We have a vote on. We understand there is one vote, so we're recessing this committee and asking members to return immediately after that vote. This hearing is recessed.
Okay.
Test, test, test.
Good, we're going to reconvene the hearing. Unfortunately, there's been another motion on the floor that we're going to have to leave. So I'm going to ask one question, and then we're going to recess again, adjourn the hearing again. And so I thank the panel for putting up with us, but we're not doing too well, you know. So, but let me begin. At our April hearing, I raised the issue of obstructive sleep apnea and the critical importance of combating driver fatigue. You know, as members know, as we all know, that the NTSB has for years recommended that the FMCSA issue clear guidelines to screen for sleep apnea. But the administration withdrew the rulemaking in 2017 to improve this screening. So the first question I have is for Ms. Chase. Can you talk about the risks posed to highway users by untreated sleep apnea?
Yes, thank you for the question. Fatigue is one of the largest problems facing the trucking industry right now. In fact, the National Transportation Safety Board has repeatedly included it on its most wanted list, addressing the issue of driver fatigue. And it's particularly troublesome when there are ways to combat it, such as, to your point, the diagnosis of sleep apnea and then the treatment. And the fact that the administration withdrew that rulemaking is problematic, and we'd encourage this subcommittee to move forward with legislation that would direct a final rule on the issue. It's not that we don't want truck drivers with this infliction driving, it's just that we want it treated, and especially when there are ways to treat it.
Thank you, and I raised the issue. Because one night I was, my wife awakened me and said, "You're not breathing." I said, "What are you talking about? I'm not breathing. I'm breathing. I'm fine." And turns out I then went to GW Hospital, did all the tests, and I found out that I have serious sleep apnea, which I was completely unaware of. I had some fatigue during the day, but I just attributed that to the normal aging process. Well, I think that I was treated, and I'm doing quite well, and it's not a major treatment, but it's. But I also don't want to create extra out-of-pocket expenses for truck drivers. I appreciate that this can be somewhat of an expense. Now, I'm lucky. I have, both my own insurance, and I'm covered here by being part of the health insurance that's offered to members in terms of our attending physician. But drivers, I think, people are, in many places, when their employers don't pick it up, are stretched to the limit. So the question really is, how do we screen, if anybody has any ideas, how do we screen for sleep apnea without creating additional costs for the drivers? What are we going to do about this now, given the fact that I can always say, well, we really need making sure that everybody's health insurance covers all of this. And we don't have that now we're in a battle right now. The courts, actually, there's cases before the courts to get rid of all of the Affordable Care Act. So I'm just kind of asking why we haven't done it, and is there something that Congress needs to do about ensuring that the truck drivers do not have to be burdened with additional costs? So any thoughts about this? Because I think it's a serious issue. Mr.
I will
Spencer.
speak on behalf of truck drivers in that sleep apnea is a medical condition that we believe drivers, if anyone has it, if it's a concern to you, you should seek treatment for that. But looking at the crash data, I would take considerable issue with those that claim that sleep apnea is causing crashes, because all sleep apnea is something that causes you not to get the quality of sleep that you may need. Whether or not you crash a vehicle, whether it's a car or a truck, has to do with driving when you're sleepy, driving when you're drowsy, something that no driver should do. But you know, one of the key things, one of the key dilemmas that professional truck drivers have is that they don't have places to park to get off the road where they actually can get, it might be a break or it might be a long 8 or 10 hour restorative sleep. But I mean, that's the biggest challenge that virtually all in trucking deal with right now, and it's not a new challenge. It's been an issue for 20 years, and we talk about infrastructure, we talk about safety. The environment that drivers and transportation are provided in has to come with some way for people to get off the road when they need it. So I hope that can be a focus, an ongoing focus going forward, because it's certainly sorely needed.
Thank you. I'm going to yield back. Shall we continue? Why don't you go find it? We have only, I believe, 6 minutes and 46 seconds left to go and vote. What a crazy system this is. So does Mr. Lipinski not want? Fine. Then we're going to recess this hearing one more time. This hearing has been recessed.
Where is it?
He's at the very bottom, but he's here right now, so we're just
Okay.
going to start with him.
We're
Mr.
going to,
Pence is here.
Mr. Pence is here. We're going to have to proceed, notwithstanding this mischief from the other side, or else we'll never get this done. And I'm pleased that Mr. Pence is here. And I'm going to recognize Mr. Pence for 5 minutes.
All right, I'm going to sit here and still sweat. Thank you, Madam Chair, Ranking Member Davis. Thank you all for being here. I was a perpetual truck owner, started companies, sold companies, so I really like the trucking business. In the interest of your time, I'm going to ask 2 quick questions, and if each of you can just give me a quick answer. And the first, you know, driver safety is paramount to me. Running trucking companies, making money was number 2. Turnover was always the most expensive thing. And I think, as you mentioned, Mr. Spencer, new drivers are the most dangerous. And I'm not quite quoting you exactly. And Mr. Spears, you mentioned that the economy, it's booming, and there's a greater demand. So, number 1, what can we do about driver turnover? What's the number 1 thing each of you think we can do about driver turnover?
Thank you for the question. Oh, I'm sorry.
I didn't know which end we were going to start from.
Should I go?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you for the question. I think one of the things that we should do from a safety perspective is make the job safer. Right now, truck driving is one of the most dangerous professions. And if you include the equipment that I mentioned earlier, such as speed limiters, automatic emergency braking, and lane departure warning, just to name a few, that would make the turnover rate decrease.
They'd feel safer. Thank you.
Yes.
For turnover, I would say pay. It's going up, should go up.
It is. I've got in my district some 125,000 propane haulers, 95,000 Fortune 500 day deliveries, and they have driver shortages. Do you think we're just going to keep going up?
No, I think it'll plateau at some point. It's not sustainable, you know, to continue to go up. But I think it has to go up to a certain level. But I also think, to earlier comments, to questions, it's a combination of things. It's the work environment. Are you doing long haul versus, you know, local, regional? There are different conditions that drive someone's decision to, you know, be in trucking. And so it has to fit each person's lifestyle. It's added to pay, it's added to benefits. These things culminate into a reason for being in trucking.
Thank you.
Actually, pay, the quick one is pay, benefits, working conditions. Having said that, there's actually more to it in that most people that enter trucking as a career really have no idea what that lifestyle is, what the job is. And again, I've lamented about the lack of any real meaningful driver training from the standpoint of safety. But, you know, realistically, we turn people loose and we expect them to know how to do all kinds of really, really important things, including descending mountains with loaded trucks, and they're not prepared and they're not comfortable and they don't stick around.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I think, again, compensation, including benefits, improving working conditions. I think improving the infrastructure that would allow drivers to not encounter so much congestion so that they're better able to complete their runs efficiently, I think are things that would certainly help.
The one aspect I would add is truck parking. We routinely hear about a lack of truck parking and inadequate truck parking from our carriers.
Thank you.
I agree with the, you know, what we've done with the equipment, adding the safety features and ergonomics in the tractors, I think has done a lot for the drivers, as well as I agree with, and I'm a shipper, and we need to do more to continue to generate velocity and not tie up the driver's time at the dock versus driving. And I think that gets to a lot of respect that we need to have for drivers.
All right, thank you.
Thank you for the question, sir. I think a lot of drivers, when I talk to them, they're concerned about the safety aspects of trucking, and so I think making regulations clear, concise, easily understandable is going to save lives.
As was mentioned, yeah, thank you.
Safer trucks, including underride guards, having those drivers know that no car is going to ever get underneath that trailer, and they're not going to deal with a fatality or have to deal with potential jail time. Mr. Spears mentioned earlier that that was a 35-mile-an-hour test. IHS did test at 40 miles per hour, the Angel Wing, and the inventor of that test tested at 47 miles per hour. Pay, driving conditions, and I was going to talk about truck driver parking. Mr. Craig and I agree on that.
All right, thank you. One, yes or no? Time to look at a third dedicated truck lane? Yes or no? Right down the way.
I don't have a comment on that one.
It's not free and it's not cheap.
No, not dedicated, just truck.
No, not just truck.
I would defer to my experts on the equipment side on this.
No opinion.
No, due to speed differences between the two.
No, the infrastructure should go to truck driver parking.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
And thank you, Mr. Pence. Mr. Lipinski for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Byrd, I want to start out. Can you elaborate on your testimony that Mexican carriers are taking advantage of loopholes in the enterprise carrier program that allows Mexican-owned but U.S. domiciled carriers to game the system? How is this harming American workers?
Well, many Mexican long-haul carriers, primarily the enterprise and certificate carriers, were supposed to meet a November 2003 deadline to renew their operating authority for long-haul operations beyond the commercial zone. It's our understanding that a lot of carriers didn't do that, and that although the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration has authority to take their operating authority away, that was not enforced due to, I think, some staffing issues and some budget issues.
Thank you. I want to move on to a question that I want to have Mr. Byrd and also Mr. Spear speak to. I know, Mr. Byrd, in your testimony, you mentioned that you believe the trucking industry will have the need for skilled drivers for decades to come, even though autonomous trucks are being developed right now. And Mr. Spear, your testimony agrees, and you make the parallel to the aviation industry, which still has pilots 50 years after automation of the cockpit. So I want to ask both of you, I guess let me start with Mr. Spear. What role do you foresee drivers will play in the future of increasingly automated driving?
I'm a bit bullish on this. I think it's driver assist, not driverless. I think technology has a role to play. I think you're going to see more of it in trucks. I think there's going to be more connectivity between trucks, trailers, and cars. Just the 5.9 gigahertz that I mentioned. I think if FCC were to give 7 channels of that to safety, you could really dramatically reduce the number of fatalities each year. That AEB kicks in, car's going to see it based on the frequency, even if the driver doesn't. So I think driver assist is a huge catalyst in the safety debate, and we need to embrace it, not be afraid of it. But I'm very bullish against this idea that we're going to be driverless. I mean, you'll see it in cars before you see it in trucks, for the same reasons we have pilots in planes. So I'm just not buying it. I also think, though, that the tech element of the industry is going to evolve, and you're going to see not only drivers, but technicians have more of a technology background. They're going to have more of a software headset. And I think a lot of that could attract a younger generation of talent into the industry that's more tech savvy. And we're seeing it on newer equipment. It's very prevalent. I've toured several OEMs, and I've seen in multiple cubicles 25, 30-year-olds writing software for the OEMs. I mean, this is where we're going, and it's coming. I just don't view it as driverless. I think it's a way to equip the driver to make them safer, more productive, better rested. There are a lot of good takeaways from this that I think are worthy of our attention.
Yeah, Mr. Byrd, how do you see?
Yeah, I would echo many of Mr. Spear's comments. I'll focus, however, on, I do agree, I think it'll be driver assist. It's the last mile. I think that there will be quite a bit of autonomous vehicles, that type of technology operating on our highways. But once we get to that last mile, that delivery in that urban type environment, I see the driver's still playing quite a significant role as far as that's concerned.
And Mr. Spear, do you agree with that? That the way you envision it?
I do. I think you look at the dynamic of each sector of the industry, and you probably see long haul where there are less cars around the truck. Concepts like platooning are certainly being tested, but we're seeing a lot of technology enter in that makes that driver better rested, better equipped, could multitask. We've seen testing out on our highways in various states and localities that's proving fruitful. But I think in an urban environment particularly, you're going to need that driver. I mean, there's so many variables that, no algorithm that we see can handle all that.
Let me ask in a brief time, Mr. Byrd, what do you see as workforce investments that we're going to need to make in drivers so that they can, for this new situation?
In terms of
situation,
work,
Mr.
you
Byrd.
say work, I'm sorry?
Workforce investments such as training that we're going to have to do.
I think it's absolutely important that we have training, very robust training for drivers, especially as we move forward with adding technologies into the vehicles. And as I've noted in my testimony, we have an aging driver workforce, so we anticipate that there will be younger drivers entering the workforce, so it'll be necessary for them to get proper training and seat time to operate safely.
Ours is multi-pronged, but really quickly, we need to take care of our own, those that are in the workforce, cessation programs, wellness programs, really taking care of those that want to drive for a long period of time. Companies have to step up to the plate and take care of their workforce. We need more urban hiring, minorities, women. That workforce is out there, and we need to leverage our federal, state, local resources to attract that talent into the industry that may not even be aware that our industry exists. Veterans, exiting service people from the military that have that skill set. And as we've talked at length, 18 to 21-year-olds, it's legal in 48 states. That works pretty good from Redding, California to San Diego. Not so good from Providence, Rhode Island. I can be at the border in 20 minutes. So that kind of logic doesn't make any sense, and there's no training, there's no technology requirements in any of those 48 states. That's why this bill is so, powerful and bipartisan in both chambers, is because it makes sense. It's grounded in training and technology, something that doesn't exist in those 48 states. I think you have to do all of those things simultaneously to address our next steps toward growth as an industry.
Thank you, and Mr. Lipinski's time has expired. Mr. Stanton.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, for holding this hearing. I want to thank our distinguished witnesses for your great testimony here today and your patience as we took a short break to vote on a couple of adjournment motions. The movement of freight and goods are key to our country's economic future and maintaining our global competitiveness. Growth over the last 20 years, improvements in the manufacturing process, and new technology are placing ever greater strain on the capacity to move goods. And this growth is only expected to continue increasing. In fact, U.S. DOT estimates that freight volumes will increase 45% by 2045. With more than 80% of the U.S. communities relying exclusively on trucks for their freight transportation needs, it's important for this Congress to make the investments needed to ensure well-maintained and reliable road network in order to reduce congestion and improve safety. I know all of the members of the panel agree. My first set of questions are for Mr. Craig from C.H. Robinson. Thank you for being here today, and I really enjoyed my visit to C.H. Robinson's facility in the Phoenix area back in April. When a shipper or broker like C.H. Robinson hires a carrier, the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration has regulations in place to guide that process. What does the agency currently require a shipper or broker to assure before they hire a motor carrier?
So right now, there's technically no standard, but FMCSA does have a series of licenses and authorizations. Some of those include CVSA has published that in Chapter 4 of their out-of-service guide. Those include having a valid authority, not being placed out of service, not being declared an imminent hazard, things like that. And again, they're compiled in Chapter 4 of the out-of-service guide.
And can you elaborate more on some of the issues that C.H. Robinson has encountered when utilizing information from the agency to hire a motor carrier?
Sure. While I mentioned in my testimony that we've got a qualification process, that often gets challenged. Folks can take any data that's published out there and make a carrier look poorly. I've included Appendix B, which is a screenshot of the CSA website. And this carrier, you can poke holes in various different parts of the data here to make this carrier look bad. So a variety of different data is used to say that our decision was could have been negligent.
And you advocate for the establishment and implementation of a motor carrier selection standard. In your view, how would the establishment of such a standard impact safety on our roads? Obviously, every panelist has talked about the importance of safety, and I do want to hear comments from Mr. Byrd, Mr. Young on the same topic, please.
Sure. As I demonstrated in the testimony, a great example was in 2017, CVSA added the inactive US DOT number to their out-of-service criteria. However, because there's no standard right now and nothing that people can rely on, oftentimes people overlook this. Many in the industry were completely unaware of that. So the carriers that did have an inactive DOT number, they were allowed to get freight from other brokers. That's one thing that we do check now, but I know many in the industry don't check that on a regular basis.
Thank you very much, Mr. Young, Mr. Byrd.
Yes, please. What C.H. Robinson is proposing, or in what's the legislation proposes, is the bare minimum. Even a chameleon carrier can change its stripes and switch from a bad company into a new DOT number, and then ultimately qualify under that criteria. The criteria that should be used is the Third-Party Intermediaries Association's published criteria that's currently, I don't know if it's currently published, but we certainly have it. It's a 3-page criteria that has a laundry list of issues and items that are available. I don't believe you were here when I indicated before, 10% of the motor carriers represent a near 50% of all crashes. The idea is to identify these 10%. Out-of-service percentage ratings, all the detail and the information on CSA allows some of that information to be there. To go the extreme to the bare minimum would just be detrimental and then ultimately allow selecting carriers based on unsafe ratings and ultimately create a bigger problem and a bigger pool of these bad apples that are going to create more crashes.
Thank you so much. Mr. Byrd?
Yeah, we would agree. We have great concern that allowing shippers to waive any liability would be a huge concern. We believe that all players in the transportation supply chain should share in liability, and that carriers that are hired should have good safety records.
Thank you very much. Mr. Craig,
Can I make
please.
one quick point that a motor carrier's standard, establishing that, would not allow any broker to waive liability. In fact, if you didn't adhere to the standard, you would almost be negligent by default.
All right, thank you very much. I'm out of time, so I will not be able to ask Mr. Spear about the big, bold infrastructure package, but we'll at a future time. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stanton. There being no other witness, there being no other members here, I want to thank all of you for giving what has been very, very helpful testimony, making the subcommittee understand the dilemmas in which we find ourselves, and I hope will unravel in the 2020 bill we are in the process of preparing. I thank all the members who attended and asked such challenging questions. I ask unanimous consent that the record of today's hearing remain open until such time as our witnesses have provided answers to any questions that may be submitted to them in writing, and unanimous consent that the record remain open for 15 days for any additional comments and information submitted by members or witnesses to be included in the record of today's hearing. Feel free to submit further information as you see fit. Without objection, so ordered. Thank you very much for attending. The subcommittee stands adjourned.